thank you. Welcome to this additional meeting of Dumfries and Galloway Council, which has been called to enable Professor John Cole, CBE, to present the findings of his independent inquiry into the procurement, design, construction, closure and remediation of the DG1 leisure complex. This is the fourth meeting of Dumfries and Galloway Council this year, and the ninth since the local elections last May, so I think we've been working quite hard. There have been some comment about the availability of Professor Cole's findings to elected members and the press prior to this meeting. This has been at the request of Professor Cole and not the decision of the administration. Professor Cole, unsurprisingly, wanted to be the first to make public comment on the inquiry he had been commissioned to undertake. The Council was content to comply with his wishes. His report is handed over to us at this meeting. After Professor Cole presents his findings this afternoon, councillors will get the opportunity to ask him questions on his presentation. The response of the Council to the findings of the report will be considered in detail, as indicated in the paper from the Chief Executive, and reported to further meetings of committee and the Council. We've all been shocked and appalled by the announcement of the decision by Young Seafood to close its plant in Annan, with a loss of 450 directly employed jobs and many more seasonal and indirectly supported jobs. The Council has been working hard with a range of partners seeking solutions. This is clearly an urgent situation, and I therefore intend to take an emergency motion this afternoon on this issue. Rona, can you advise us of any apologies, please?
Yes, thank you, Leader. We have apologies from Councillors Ronnie, Sloan, Stitt and Young.
Thank you, Rona. And do any members have a declaration of interest? No? Excellent. Can we move on to the minutes of the meeting of the 29th of March, which I would like to propose?
Happy to second, Leader.
Happy to agree the minutes? Oh, Councillor Carruthers.
Thanks, Leader. I wasn't at that meeting, so as I was looking through them with interest, just to see what was going on, it's not a matters arising, it just points to clarity. Page 5, in particular. Page 5, so we're looking at 8.4. Is that seminar, member seminar, is that in the throes? Make sure that's getting done. And actually it refers at 10.1 to an appendix. Should that be contained within the minutes? I think if it was, I wasn't able to read that, so maybe...
No, it doesn't seem to... Okay.
Perhaps some information... Noted the findings in the Standards Commission report is attached in the appendix to the report.
Yeah, it's appendix to the original report, it's not appendix to the minutes.
It was the original, what was it?
If you have a look at the original report, it should be on there.
Okay. Is the member seminar...
Member seminar, can we have an update on that, please? Thanks. So, members happy to agree the minute? Okay, grand. We can move on to item 4 on the Transformation Board proposals. This report sets out proposals for the operation of the Transformation Board agreed at full council in our setting of the budget and provides leadership and oversight to the council's modernisation programme. The proposals reflect on the relative success of the council's previous arrangements under the Business Transformation Steering Group and seek to build on this. The council continues to face significant financial challenges, and over the next 2 budgets we expect to be required to find a further 36 million of savings, or possibly even more. The effective operation of the Transformation Board, bringing together councillors, staff representatives and senior council officers, and which can draw on recent experience of managing a re-engineering of the council, will be critical to the success of the modernisation programme. The Transformation Board is not a committee of the council. It will not make decisions. Those will continue to be made by committees and full council. It will be a discussion forum which will be able to make recommendations which can then be subject to community consultation prior to decision making. And I'll open the meeting up to members' debate. Councillor Hislop.
Thank you, Leader. It's just with regard to the proposals reflecting the relative success. Now, if Queen of the South go to the new camp and get beat 10-0, and then come back to Palmerston and get beat 9-0, that's a relative success. Could you just expand what relative success means, please? Well,
this is the relative success of the Business Transformation Steering Group, and I don't have the paper that was presented to Council previously on this matter. They managed to identify several £million of savings, which are then translated into the budget. So I think the ability to achieve savings through consideration by a board of this type is adequate evidence of their success. That is success which would not have been achieved as easily without that sort of member involvement. Councillor Davidson.
Thank you, Leader. I'm not particularly a football fan, although I listen carefully to everything that Councillor Hislop says. I'm quite happy to move the recommendations.
Okay. We have a seconder, please. Aye. Councillor Nixon. We agree the recommendations? Okay. Thank you. We can move on to item 5, which is the main topic of today's meeting, the independent inquiry into the construction of the DG1 complex in Dumfries. This has been a difficult, complex and painstaking piece of work by Professor Cole and his team. And on behalf of the Council, I thank Professor Cole and his colleagues Stuart McCartney and Chris Phillips for their diligence and professionalism in preparing the report to be presented to us today. It does not make for pleasant reading for members or officers of the Council, or for that matter, for the contractor and subcontractors responsible for the construction of DG1. The findings contain a number of lessons and issues for the Council to reflect upon, and also for the Scottish and UK governments. The construction industry, which receives huge sums of public money to deliver significant projects ultimately delivered for the public, not for the public sector, should also reflect on its responsibilities to the public. In my own view, the behaviour of the main contractor, who refused to collaborate with this inquiry, reveals one of of unrestricted capitalism's unacceptable faces. It appears that the industry is unable and unwilling to take responsibility for the safety of members of the public who use the facilities it is paid handsomely to construct. Tighter regulation by government, I believe, is therefore essential. But I would now like to ask Professor Cole to present his report and findings to Council, and then there will be an opportunity to ask questions. Mr. Crothers, you have a point of order? Or?
It's not just it's a point of clarity in regards to if it was an order. I don't know exactly when it is, but going back to no criticism of the report whatsoever. I think what I've read of it up to now is a thorough and good report. It's just in regards to meeting a 3-day. We have a 3-day working day timeline in which we should
clarify that. And I think Professor Cole can explain that too. This is his report. This is not our report at the moment. This is Professor Cole's report, and he is presenting his findings to us. I think the timescale is his timescale. Professor Cole, would you?
Lena, I think it's the protocols that we've agreed as a council is what I'm making sure that we're actually adhering to them. I'm not saying we shouldn't have a presentation. We shouldn't be able to get a chance to have question and answers in regards to considering the actual appendix, which I got this morning. I read it for 20 minutes on Friday afternoon. It's the only chance I had. We should have it 3 days before, is the point I'm making.
This is not a report of the Council. It is not a report of the administration. It is Professor Cole's report.
Even if we get clarity,
he is in control of its release. Professor Coles, would you take us through your report?
Back at a later point, Leader.
Chair, can we have less of this interruption from the floor, and a bit of respect for the Chair and a bit of respect for Professor Cole? Thank you.
Should you wish to, Councillor Crothers, if you wish to question Professor Cole and his decision regarding the release of the report, you can do so after he has made his presentation. Now, Professor Cole, would you be good enough to take us through your presentation?
But Leader, it's nothing to do with the report. I said it is absolutely a good report. It's the protocols. Make sure that we're adhering to our own standing orders is what I'm asking. If we get clarity.
Chair, you've passed on to Professor Cole. Please.
I've made a decision. We are proceeding. Sorry.
Yep.
Yes.
Sorry, Chair, you've passed on to Professor Cole. Can we get on with the business and stop this interruptions from the floor, please? Thanks.
Yes, I have asked Professor Cole to give us his presentation. Please do so. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. And again, if I could just re-echo the statements made by the by the leader. It was very much my view that the report should not be released until I spoke to you and presented to you, the people who commissioned the report. The risk of having it in the public's arena before that is that the opportunity for the people to talk about a report that the council themselves haven't heard from. I also want to deliver these findings to you directly, personally, to fulfil the obligation placed on me and commission me to undertake this inquiry. It is unfortunately my fault, if you want to put fault anywhere, as to why you didn't get the report until today, but you were given the opportunity to look at it over the Thursday and Friday, I believe, and hopefully you get some time this morning, although given the length of the report, I doubt if it's adequate to properly read it. Today is simply me telling you my findings. It's not, I think, seeking any decision from Council today. So it is really just me telling you what I find in this inquiry, and then the Council will have its own time to decide how it wishes to proceed with the recommendations or any other aspect of the report. So apologies for that. So to start again, Leader, Deputy Leader, Chief Executive, members of Council, ladies and gentlemen. At the time of this appointment, I originally estimated that I should be in a position to present the findings in early March. However, at that stage, I had not yet become aware of the breadth and complexity of the task that you had set for myself and my colleagues, Mr. Stuart McCartney, a leading Scottish structural engineer, and Mr. Chris Phillips, a senior solicitor, both of whom have also worked with me on the Edinburgh Schools inquiry. We did not initially expect an inquiry into a single building could present such a wide range of diverse issues as this case, in the case of the DG1. This is particularly in relation to the complicated procurement issues and the extended litigation process, as opposed to dealing with the more straightforward but deeply concerning issues of widespread substandard construction. The report is effectively a combination of 4 reports, each one examining a distinct phase of the project. First, the original governance, project management, planning and procurement of DG1. Secondly, the construction of DG1 by Kier. Third, the period covering the emergence of the scale of the defects, the enforced closure of the building and the litigation, and leading to a settlement. And fourthly, the current remedial works project, the first year of it, as it still is ongoing. The need to address adequately each of these phases, unfortunately for you, the reader, resulted in a very lengthy report, and I apologise in advance for any deprivation of sleep that may result. The very unfortunate saga of the rise and fall and rise again of the DG1 building extends over a 20-year period, from its first inception up to the present day. That saga, while hopefully in its final chapter, will not reach its conclusion until the building is operational and capable of being occupied by the public, which event is currently planned to happen in mid-2019. The analogy with a last page conclusion is perhaps inappropriate, as a report of the inquiry, although certainly of book length, is not intended to be a form of whodunit. It is instead a considered reflection on the structures, processes, levels of expertise employed, and decision-making adopted, which unfortunately resulted in an episode in the Council's history of capital development, over which many, I'm sure, would like to draw a veil, but from which, like all troubled projects, there is much to learn for the future. Before providing an analysis of the findings of the inquiry, I would like to preface my commentary by expressing my appreciation for the open, transparent, and supportive approach adopted by the Chief Executive and his senior colleagues, who have at all times cooperated fully with the inquiry and respected its essential independence. I'd also wish to express my appreciation to all of those who are willing to come forward as witnesses to give evidence to the inquiry. In particular, I would wish to acknowledge those former senior officers and members of staff of the Council who gave evidence. It was clear from their evidence that those who had participated in the planning and delivery of the project had at all times felt that they were acting in the best interests of the project, and that they are deeply disappointed with the unfortunate history of the project since its opening in 2008. The nature of the agreed remit that you as the Council set for me demonstrates a strong desire on your part to understand how to avoid recurrences of these problems. That strong desire was reaffirmed in separate meetings I had with both the Leader and Deputy Leader. In that regard, it is then understandable that the majority of the remit items set for the inquiry tended to focus in their wording on looking inwards to examine the actions or inactions of the Council that may have contributed to the problems encountered. However, I would like to make it explicit from the start of this presentation of the findings to the inquiry that the fundamental underlying cause of the problems encountered since the opening of DG1 are not primarily due to actions or inactions of the Council, but are due to the unacceptable substandard quality of key aspects of the design and construction of the building as undertaken by the design and build contractor. As I mentioned previously, I was chair of the Edinburgh Schools Inquiry, and it is disappointing but important to note that the widespread failure in relation to both the construction of the masonry walls and installation of essential fire stopping found throughout the 17 schools in Edinburgh and subsequently further afield were replicated in the DG1 building. Unfortunately, the failures by the contractor, the client representatives and by building standards inspectors to identify them were also replicated. The information provided to the inquiry in relation to DG1 is, however, much more disturbing. The annotated sectional diagram in the report on pages 24 and 25 demonstrates the extent and range of defects that were discovered in the DG1 building, not just in the two safety critical factors of wall construction and fire protection, but extending from subfloor level through all key internal and external elements up to the roof of the building. To find such a wide range of defects present in a single building is, in my experience, unique and can only be viewed as a result of major failings of quality assurance, good practice, construction knowledge, basic skills, and workmanship at all levels of the construction team, from managers, subcontractors, supervisory staff, and individual tradesmen. A lack of care and attention in how the building was put together is evident throughout the building. This project again demonstrates the absolute necessity for clients to use procurement methods and mechanisms within them that ensure that they have adequately expert, resourced, effective and independent detailed scrutiny of the work of contractors. Unfortunately, recent evidence is increasingly showing that clients cannot rely on the quality assurance by contractors of their own work. The failings of the Council, while secondary to those of the contractor, were, however, still significant in that they related to the Council's failure to act as an experienced and knowledgeable client of construction in ensuring that the building being delivered was both designed and constructed to the required standard. This is a responsibility that clients cannot delegate away from themselves to contractors, and particularly so when the project is funded by public money. I intend to briefly address each of the remit items from the inquiry in turn, but before doing so, I would like to remind you of the original laudable aspiration of the Council as stated in the brief produced at the time of the original inception of the project. The new building was to be of high design quality, to be highly energy efficient. It was to become a regional centre of excellence for sporting activities. It was to be capable of hosting significant events which would attract audiences from outside the region, and it should act as a catalyst for the economic regeneration of Dumfries. Absolutely excellent objectives set by the Council. The brief included the aspiration that the design of the building should be such, and I quote, that it would grow old gracefully while continuing to serve the community over a lifespan of at least 40 years. In setting these objectives, the Council demonstrated civic leadership and the type of longer-term strategic thinking that is often missing. However, in the implementation of the project, these quality factors would appear to have been increasingly relegated in prominence by a focus on the achievement of shorter-term objectives of cost and time to opening, which focus largely drove the decision by the Council as the procurement model to be used and shape the course of events to come. It is interesting to note that the building in which we currently sit was constructed over 100 years ago, during which period it has indeed grown old gracefully and has continued to serve the community over all that time. The Council of the time invested in quality, and that investment has paid for itself many times over and continues to do so. The Council in those days appointed Edinburgh architects who, through a dialogue with the Council, confirmed a brief, produced a design specification that was an expression of the quality the Council were seeking, The architect, acting on behalf of the council, then oversaw and directed the implementation of that design and the construction of the project by the contractor, who knew that nothing less than the required quality would be accepted by the architect, and employed only tradesmen capable of delivering that quality, tradesmen who apparently also took pride in their work. In the case of DG1, the council had no effective relationship or ongoing contact with the architect or design team who designed the project, having delegated responsibility to a contractor for the design and construction of the complex, a contractor who in turn established the scope of engagement of the design team, paid their fees, and directed the activities of the design team. The design team was not appointed to protect the interests of the council, but only to do what the contractor employed them to do. The requirement for regular inspections by professionally qualified members of the design team appointed by CARE had been included as part of the collateral warranty documentation provided by CARE to the council. The firm of architects and engineers employed by CARE, in a letter sent to the inquiry immediately before the publication of this report, stated that as a result of the arrangement between themselves and CARE, visits to the site to carry out inspections had been limited. Further, they stated that on the occasions when they had attended the site, they had drawn the contractor's attention to variations from good practice in the work underway, but due to the nature of the contract, had no authority to instruct rectification of defects that they had identified to the contractor. In relation to the previously stated long-term objectives for DG1, instead of 100 or even 40 years of serving the community, the DG1 building was closed after only 6 years of compromised use due to the ongoing impact of recurring defects. However, neither of the short-term objectives, which were given precedence by the Council in determining the procurement model, were also achieved. The original 18-month contract was completed over 7 months late, a run-over of some 40%. The estimated gross cost of the building to date to the Council is some £42 million, including the original site purchase, construction costs, and the costs associated with the litigation process and remediation contract. The net cost of the Council will be roughly £33 million, after allowing for the £9.5 million settlement agreed with CARE. The cost of the remediation contract to put the building right are estimated at some £19 million, compared with the original total construction cost of roughly £12.5 million. Some elements of that additional cost, however, do not arise purely from the poor work of the original contractor. The evidence to the inquiry indicates significant inadequacies in the funding and level of provision of effective maintenance of the building by the Council during the 6-year period of its occupation. It is acknowledged that the limited resources made available to maintenance were having to be expended in struggling with the operational impact of a continuous stream of emerging defects, and that the detailed design, specification and poor workmanship of the building in many ways exacerbated the demand for maintenance. However, it is also clear that the extent and quality of maintenance undertaking was inadequate and has contributed to the increased cost of the remedial works contract. I will now briefly address each of the remit items set for the inquiry. Remit item 1, the leadership and project management applied by the Council for the duration of both the original project and the remediation project, and the due diligence undertaken in assigning responsibility for the remediation project. If I could just say, all of the remit items are quite complicated and have several aspects to them, which maybe explains the length of the report. It is the view of the inquiry that throughout both the implementation of the original project and the development of the remedial project, the Council failed to allocate the appropriate internal level of resources in terms of the required level of expertise, experience, or time resource. On the original project, the Council failed to prepare a properly structured and comprehensive business case in line with the accepted good practice in the public sector. In relation to the governance arrangements, the inquiry would also question the level of decision-making referred to the ad hoc subcommittee of Council, which found itself acting in an executive role rather than providing scrutiny of the actions and decisions of the executive team charged with the delivery of the project. This was of particular significance in relation to the choice of procurement model used. The inquiry is of the view that the skill sets of those who provided strategic direction, led and executed the original project did not include the relevant and appropriate range of knowledge and professional expertise best suited for the planning, project management, procurement and delivery of a complex building project. These activities are specialist by nature and should not be viewed as just another task to be undertaken through normal administrative procedures and by generalist staff. It is a view of the inquiry that Council's failure to implement the approved committee recommendation to recruit and appoint an experienced building construction project manager to oversee the DG1 project was a contributory factor to subsequent failures in the project. In relation to the remedial project, it's the opinion of the inquiry that failure to establish a dedicated and fully resourced project management board to oversee the remedial works project and to appoint a full-time in-house project manager with construction procurement experience during the development of the brief procurement and early construction stages led to a lack of necessary informed proactive influence by the Council on the nature and direction of the project. This is seen to have contributed both to the level of increase in time been taken to complete the project and in the outturned cost of this contract due to avoidable inefficiencies, in part resulting from the late instruction of additional works. Remit items 2 and 3 I will deal with together. The rationale of the Council entering into the original design and build contract for the facility and the effect this arrangement may have had on the construction process and the contractual relationships between CARE and the Council. It is the opinion of the inquiry that the choice of design and build for a flagship project was not in the best interest of the Council in terms of its desire for a building of enduring and civic quality. The additional risk to quality of using this methodology had been pointed out to the subcommittee prior to the decision on procurement. The risks attached to taking this decision to proceed with the design and build form of contract were increased in light of the Council's poorly resourced and relatively inexperienced client interface with the contractor. This resulted in a situation where the quality objectives of the project and the wider public interest of the Council were not adequately defined in the procurement process or adequately protected in the design and construction of the building. It is also the opinion of the inquiry that the process used by the Council to determine the procurement route was overcomplicated and lengthy, inappropriate for the detailed involvement of a non-specialist committee, lacking in informed professional input, and highly subjective in terms of the criteria used for the assessment of bids. It is also the view of the inquiry that the decision by the ad hoc subcommittee to simultaneously advertise for design only and design and build proposals for the project was unnecessary, fundamentally flawed, and wasteful of private sector resources. Evidence to the inquiry suggested the existence of a highly prevalent but misconceived view amongst many of those within the Council that were associated with the project that as this was a design and build contract, the Council had very limited rights to question the design and construction processes, as these were the responsibility solely of the contractor. This belief appears to have been an influencing factor in the way in which the contract was administered and the lack of adequate enforcement of the contractual rights of the Council during construction. The aim of transferring all risks from the client to a contractor through using design and build is in reality unachievable, as the risk to the functionality, safe use and lifetime maintenance of buildings that happen to be poorly constructed ultimately will lie with the client, who will have to live with all the negative consequences. It is possible to deliver high-quality buildings using a design and build procurement approach, but the client must incorporate mechanisms and expert resources within their own process to ensure that they can retain control of the quality of conceptual and detailed design and of construction quality. This did not happen to the required level on DG1. Remit item 4. The role of the Council professional consultants appointed to act for the Council and CARE Northern and their supply chain in relation to the quality assurance of the construction of the original building, including the inspection process, granting of completion certificates, possession certificates, and building control certificates. On-site support. I've already commented on the failure to appoint a project manager and employer's agent with experience in the form of contract used and with a professional background relating to the construction of complex buildings. Additionally, the inquiry views as inadequate the arrangements made for the monitoring of the quality of works on site, particularly in relation to the decision to proceed with the part-time appointment of a clerk of works who, like the project manager, was from a civil engineering and roads-related background. The project justified and required the appointment of a full-time building clerk of works with experience in the construction of complex buildings. The inquiry is also of the opinion that the level of provision of support to the employer's agent of professional architectural and mechanical engineering advisors as initially sought by the Council was inadequate, given the limited experience of the project manager in complex building projects, and that there was a subsequent failure to effectively use even this limited level of resource on site during construction. Even with a very limited number of visits to the site by those professionals, evidence provided to the inquiry indicates that a number of significant problems of design and construction were identified. However, no effective action was taken by the design and build contractor to ensure that these concerns or the identified defects were properly addressed. It is the opinion of the inquiry that there was a lack of coordination with the various inputs from those undertaking site monitoring roles, who appeared to have limited contact, if any, with each other or with the main contractor and construction supply chain. There was also a disconnect between the identification of defects in design or work on site and the subsequent checking to see whether the contractor had actually addressed it. It is the opinion of the inquiry that the Council did not adequately enforce their rights as laid out in the contract in relation to the identification of defects, both in the development of the design and on site, in relation to the issuing of instructions to the contractor to remove defective work, and the use of the powers of the contract in situations where the contractor failed to do so. The design and build contractor. In the opinion of the inquiry, the extent and nature of the defects discovered are evidence of a lack of care, attention, basic construction skills, and understanding of some of the fundamental principles of good construction on the part of those who built this building and those who supervised them. The contractor failed to deliver a building in accordance with the standards set down in the employer's requirements and in the other contract documentation. The DG1 project is an extreme example of the failure of quality management functions throughout all levels of operations and management in the execution of this contract. It is difficult for me to accept that large areas of work, which we still saw at our early visits to the site, were not condemned by the contractor's own site management team and quality supervisors, never mind by the clients. The use of Heath Robinson devices, such as the incorporation of domestic funnels and trays connected into the drainage system in failed attempts to collect water from the first floor spa, as opposed to properly addressing the cause of the leaks, is astounding. Frequent changes throughout the project by the contractor in the personnel undertaking the site management could not have assisted the project. It's also clear that the relationship between the contractor and key subcontractors throughout the project appeared to be strained. However, there is no excuse for the failure by a major contractor to ensure that the standard of detailing and workmanship was to the required level in so many areas of the building. It is a finding of the inquiry that there were multiple failures on the part of Kier in relation to their management of the project, their approach to quality, their lack of supervision, their inadequate coordination and quality assurance of the design and construction work of subcontractors, their employment of inadequately skilled workmen, and their failure to deliver a building that was properly fit for purpose. It's also a finding of the inquiry that subsequent to the practical completion of the building, the contractor failed to respond adequately to the requests of the Council in relation to undertaking effective permanent remedial works to the discovered defects in the building. I now address building standards. It's a legal requirement under the Building Scotland Act 2003 that approved building warrants are required from building standards before construction is allowed to commence. In the case of DG1 building, only a Stage 1 warrant had been received before commencement of works, which covered the foundations of the building. Whilst the Stage 2 and Stage 3 warrants for the superstructure, the elements above ground of the building, were submitted by the design and build contractor for approval in mid-2006, they were not issued as approved by the Council's Building Standards Department until March 2008, nearly 2 years later, at which stage the project was virtually complete. This was effectively a breach of the law, and as a result, the building had been built without confirmation that the designs to which the contractor was working were compliant with building regulations. It would, for example, subsequently be shown that the fire strategies for the building was non-compliant. Council records indicate that 5 visits were made to inspect the site by building standard inspectors. These are from the records we were able to see. There may have been other visits, but the records show 5. 3 in relation to drainage and 2 in relation to inspection of fire stopping. No references are made to building standard inspections having undertaken any inspections of the other parts of the building where breaches of building regulations would be identified. Unfortunately, the effectiveness of these inspections as confirmation of compliance with the requirements of building standards, even in the 2 areas referred to, could not be relied upon. Subsequent surveys after the opening of the building would identify widespread and major breaches of fire compartment walls and floors through inadequately installed or totally omitted fire stopping. Other surveys would identify major problems with the underground drainage installations. The inquiry was advised that the problems with staff resources in the Building Standards Department were a contributory factor. This could not be considered as an acceptable excuse. However, it again should not be forgotten that irrespective of the inadequate quality of inspections undertaken by others, the design and build contractor is responsible for constructing the building in full compliance with the regulations and with the contract requirements, and should have carried out his own inspections to confirm this compliance. A second requirement of the Scottish law is the issue of a notice of acceptance of completion certificate. It's a legal requirement that a notice of acceptance of completion is issued by building standards before a new building can be occupied. This is in order to protect the safety of potential users. This objective can only be effectively realised if the process used to verify compliance, particularly in relation to issues such as fire protection, are robust. They unfortunately were not. At the time of the opening of the DG1 in May 2008, the required notice of acceptance of completion certificate had not been issued, as significant changes made during the construction of the building had not been submitted for approval. A temporary occupation certificate permitting only temporary occupation had been issued by the Building Standards Department to cover the brief period from the 18th of April 2008 until the 18th of June 2008, a period of 2 months. On the expiry of this temporary occupation certificate on the 18th of June, no notice of acceptance of completion certificate or extension to the temporary occupation certificate was applied for or issued. However, the new building remained in full public use from its opening in May 2008. It would not be until the 11th of June 2009, more than a year later, that the legally required notice of acceptance of completion certificate for the building to be occupied would be issued by the Building Standards Division of Dumfries and Galloway Council. This in effect meant that the ongoing use of the building by the Council during the period from 18th of June 2008 until 11th of June 2009 was in contravention of the requirements of the Building Scotland Act 2003, such requirements being the responsibility of the Council itself to administer. It is the finding of the inquiry that there were multiple failures on the part of the contractor to adequately comply with the requirements of the Building Scotland Act. The inquiry also finds that there were significant failures in the administering of the Building Scotland Act by the Council's Building Standards Department in relation to both the response times in issuing approved warrants and to the inadequacies in the reasonable inspection of the works to confirm compliance with the regulations. The Council's Project Management Board and Project Manager should also have taken reasonable steps to ensure that statutory requirements in relation to the granting of warrant approvals and the acceptance of completion certificates had been satisfactorily complied with in accordance with standard practice in the industry, in accordance with the requirements of the contract, and in accordance with the law of the land. The statement of practical completion. This is totally separate to the notice of acceptance of a completion certificate, and this is in relation to the legal contract between the Council and Keir. The issue of such a statement of practical completion removes the right of the employer to any further entitlement to liquidated damages and relieves the contractor of having to carry out further work. The inquiry is of the opinion from the evidence provided that the building was prematurely accepted by the Council's representative as having reached a state of practical completion. and that the necessary informed inspection of the building elements had not been adequately undertaken to establish this fact and prevent the acceptance of the building in a state which potentially held risks for users of the building. The contractual statement of practical completion for DG1 was issued by the chair of the Project Management Board and not by the employer's agent, one of whose duties under the contract is to undertake appropriate checks to confirm that the building has reached a stage where a statement of practical completion can be issued. The view that the acceptance of the building was premature is corroborated by evidence given to the inquiry that on the discovery in 2011 of the extent of defects in the fire stopping of the building, the fire authorities indicated that except for the undertaking by the Council of Emergency Remedial Works, they would have required that the building be closed due to it being considered unsafe for continued public use. Remit item 5. The management of risks to the Council and if the Council's standard practice regarding quality assurance provided adequate checks. It is a view of the inquiry that in the execution of the original project, there was an over-concentration on the risks associated with the achievement of cost and time objectives by the Council, which resulted in a lack of appropriate focus on the original quality objectives set for the project, inadequate provisions of measures to protect the quality of the project, and a resultant failure to achieve a building of quality. It appears to the inquiry that the Council placed considerable reliance on the adoption of the PRINCE2 methodology in the Council's approach to the management of the project. Whilst the methodology provides a useful structured approach to the organisation and procedural aspect of project management, it should in no way be viewed as a substitute for a project team with the appropriate resourced level of professional expertise and experience. In relation to the remedial works contract, it is viewed of the inquiry that there was a lack of informed strategic oversight and ownership on the part of the Council in shaping the development of this multi-million-pound building project, including a failure to properly identify and strategise for the risks associated with further defects being identified, despite statements from expert witnesses that no assurance could be given that they would not be discovered. The resources of the Council were largely concentrated on the legal pursuit of damages, with an inadequate focus and allocation of resources on properly identifying the need for and addressing the reinstatement of this building to an acceptable standard. The complexity of and level of risks associated with both the procurement and technical aspects of this large project would have justified the full-time allocation of an in-house experienced project manager in both the pre-contract development stages and in the construction stages. However, this provision was not put in place until a year into the contract period. It is a view of the inquiry that in light of the impact that the substandard development of the DG1 building has had on the Council's ability to deliver public services, on the financial position of the Council, and on its reputation, the Council needs to review its exposure to risk in relation to its organisational arrangements in terms of the allocation of responsibility for and the resourcing of the necessary expertise in the planning, procurement and project management of building complexes. Items 6, 7 and 8 I will deal with together. These relate to handling of the problems since 2009, the scope of the appointment of the professional team, and the issues that the project is now facing but were not originally allowed for, and why they were not discovered. In the opinion of the inquiry, the Council's decision to seek damages from Kier and to arrange for a separate contract for the necessary remedial works was totally appropriate in the circumstances. The Council also acted appropriately and responsibly in the actions it took in 2011 to have emergency repairs carried out to the defective fire stopping within the building. As previously stated, it is, however, the opinion of the inquiry that the Council failed to adequately resource the internal, strategic and executive construction-related management of the remedial works project. There was no holistic and strategic overview taken of the needs of the remedial project, simply a very narrow focus that all that should be addressed in the 2014 tender for the remedial work should be those areas of defects in the building that were attributable to Kier. The Council were already at that stage in possession of a report that had heavily criticised the lack of adequate maintenance to the building, particularly in relation to the mechanical and electrical installations, yet the instructions to the design team from the Council were only to address defects caused by Kier. It was also evident to the Council that a range of alterations were necessary to the building to improve its functionality and efficiency, including, as an example, the relocation of the spa from its first floor location. A proper in-depth survey of all aspects of the building, other than those related to identified defects attributable to care, had not been procured to form an overview of the total work necessary to be carried out and to restore the building to an appropriate condition that would meet the reasonable expectations of the public and properly address the backlog of maintenance issues. The first survey of this type was actually carried out as part of the remedial works contract after it had been let to McLaughlin and Harvey in September 2016. Appendix 3 of the report, which are the very back section of it, contains photographs of the building taken as part of the survey before the commencement of any work by the builder. If you look at these photographs, these look like a building that is in the middle of construction rather than a building which is finished and being maintained properly by the council. It is evidence that the building is in a very sad state of repair, which the remedial works contract should have been designed to address, as well as addressing the defects attributable to care. I don't think any of you can look at those photographs and think that this building is maintained. It's the opinion of the inquiry that the council should have closed DG1 much earlier than 2014 to allow the stated requirement by the independent experts for necessary investigations to be undertaken and for any additional discovered work items to be included in a comprehensive set of tender documentation. With the delay by the council in closing the building from its original appointment of experts in 2011 up until 2014, the leaks from the swimming pool and spa and the unwanted migration of heavily chlorinated air from the wet side to the dry side throughout the building continued to cause further deterioration to the fabric of the building and its services during that period. In early summer 2014, the council decided to go to tender for the remedial works without having carried out the required investigations that had been advised were required. The council had been advised that the approximate value of this contract would be £3.4 million based on a December 2013 estimate. All public sector works with an estimated cost in excess of approximately £4.2 million at the time were, as a matter of course, required to be advertised in the European Journal, so this seemed to fall well below the limit. Despite a range of major additional works, particularly mechanical and electrical in nature, being added to the tender documentation between that estimate in December 2013 and release of the tender in mid-2014, no revised pre-tender estimate was prepared for the council. The inquiry considered that this omission is a failure of good practice on the part of the project management team. The returned tenders, previously estimated at $3.4 million, ranged from $6.9 million to $10 million, far exceeding both the $3.4 million in the estimate and the $4.2 million threshold requiring advertising in the European Journal. Having taken legal advice, the council had little option but to abandon the tender process and place a new European compliant advertisement. It is the opinion of the inquiry that whilst the need for a pre-tender estimate to check advertising requirements should have been identified by the external project management team, the council also failed to adequately resource the remedial works project internally with an appropriately qualified professional officer to oversee the work of that team and ensure their compliance and the council's compliance with statutory requirements. The need to re-advertise did give an opportunity for further investigations to be carried out with the emptying of the closure of the building and the emptying of the pools. And these identified a wide range of further defects which were added to the new tender to be released. It is a finding of the inquiry that the production of a considered brief for all aspects of the remedial contract and the development of agreed design solutions that reflected that brief should have been implemented and completed in the considerable period since the closure of the DG1 building and in time to have been properly incorporated into the tender documentation for the project. This should not have been left until after the contract had commenced. The re-advertisement of the remedial works attracted only one contractor, McLaughlin and Harvey, originally Bar, who were willing to tender the work. Having taken further legal advice and assessed the options available, the council determined they would seek to negotiate an acceptable tender price with this single tenderer. On the 16th of October 2015, McLaughlin and Harvey submitted a price tender of $10.8 million for carrying out the revised content of the project. This exceeded the pre-tender estimate, in this case prepared by McGowan Miller Quantity Surveyors in September 2015 by 1.2 million. The analysis of the tender submitted by McLaughlin and Harvey indicated the higher pricing of the preliminaries to the contract, as opposed to the pricing of the individual works packages, accounted for much of the increase over the Quantity Surveyors pre-tender estimate. By mid-2016, following several months of negotiation, a reduced figure of 9.8 million was agreed as a basis of a contract to be entered between McLaughlin and Harvey and the Council. It is a view of the inquiry that it would have been much preferable to have had effective competition between main contractors than to have negotiated with a single contractor, and a readvertisement may have been worthwhile. However, it is impossible at this stage to know if a readvertisement would have been successful in attracting further competition, so the position adopted by the Council is understandable. The settlement of the claim. As you will be very aware, it was decided to seek to bring the matter of the claim against Kier to a faster resolution than the formal litigation process through a facilitated mediation. In December 2015, after that process, the Council subsequently agreed to an offer of 9.5 million in full and final settlement of the claim. It is the opinion of the inquiry that the Council acted reasonably in accepting this offer, purely based on the information available at the time to the Council and to their legal advisors as to the extent of the defects identified, and based the analysis provided by their legal advisors as to the reasonable level of recovery that the offer appeared to represent. So what I'm saying there is that based on the information that the Council had, it was a reasonable thing to do. Subsequently, it would turn out to be completely inadequate. It would have been impossible in the circumstances and under the procurement strategy adopted for the Council to have foreseen the level of unidentified latent defects that would subsequently be discovered when the contractor started to open up the building, and the unfortunate implications of the Council of agreeing that the 9.5 million be in the form of a full and final settlement. The missed opportunity to identify defects to the masonry walls is my next point. In mid-April 2016, following receipt of advice from central government agencies as to the defects discovered in the masonry walls of the 17 Edinburgh schools, the Property and Architectural Services Manager in the Council, in light of the suspected prevalence of these defects in design and build projects, and already having discovered similar defects in the other design and build leisure facilities of the Council, requested that checks be carried out immediately for those defects in the DG1 building. This was in March 2016, before the letting of the contract with McLaughlin and Harvey, which happened in September of that year. Unfortunately, this request was not complied with in advance of the remedial works contract commencing. The inquiry is of the opinion that if the request of the Property and Architectural Services Manager had been proceeded with, the defects to the masonry construction could have been identified, and the letting of the remedial construction could have been delayed until this additional work had been designed and specified, acceptable rates agreed for inclusion in the contract, and the necessary funding approved by the Council. This could have avoided the significant prolongation costs incurred by the Council as a result of the lack of productivity created by the discovery of these defects during construction, and the resultant 5 to 6 months delay by the Council in issuing instructions on how to deal with them. The role of the independent experts. The type and level of investigations undertaken, including the extensive analysis of particular aspects of the work by a number of specialist companies appointed at the request of the independent experts, would indicate to the inquiry that a professional and experienced approach was adopted, consistent with the legal and professional requirement of them to act with reasonable diligence. Comprehensive reports were produced by the independent experts to inform a schedule of defects, which was submitted to the court, and which also provided a basis for the mediation process that would lead to the extrajudicial settlement. This schedule of defects listed in excess of 90 major defects in the building. The factors contributing to the considerable increase in the duration and cost of the remedial works contract since the commencement would, however, come under 4 broad headings. The extent of identified defects proving to be much greater than that had been measured. The discovery of defects not previously identified in the investigations. The need to undertake the work associated with the lack of maintenance to the building, and to accommodate client changes necessary to improve the efficiency of the building. It is the opinion of the inquiry that the extent of additional defects discovered following the opening up of the building fabric could not reasonably have been foreseen by the independent experts without considerable additional intrusive and destructive investigations, which would have been beyond what could normally be expected. Evidence to the inquiry indicates that there was consistent advice from the independent experts that they gave no assurance as to the true extent of latent defects without major work being carried out by a contractor. It is also evident that the necessary additional maintenance related work and client changes had specifically been excluded by the Council from the brief for both the independent experts and the design team, and that as a result these had not been included in the tender documentation. Overall, it is the opinion of the inquiry that the very significant majority of the additional and unidentified defects could not reasonably be expected to be identified in advance of bringing the contractor on site or a contractor on site. It is the view of the inquiry that only the majority of these unidentified and largely hidden defects could have been identified, that the only time when these could have been identified was when the original construction was ongoing. This would have required a high level of on-site independent scrutiny and inspection by site monitors acting on behalf of the Council during the initial contract. In relation to the defective construction of the masonry walls, which was the most significant factor in delaying the project, the evidence of the inquiry suggests that there were no such inspections by Council representatives of this element of the construction. Remits item 9 and 10. The contractual arrangement between McLaughlin and Harvey and Dumfries and Galloway Council, and the conduct of the contract negotiations. The choice of contract. In the usual circumstances of the DG1 building, the legal team were anxious to have a fully market-tested, priced tender with a finite number to establish and justify to the court the cost of making good those defects attributable to care, and thus thereby justify their claim. To produce a finite number required the production of a priced bill of quantities of those defects and the work necessary to address them. This would only be an assessment, as by their nature, the true extent of defects was not accurately measurable until the elements within the building were opened up. The contract chosen for the remedial works was the Scottish form of building contract, standard building contract with quantities 2011. This form of contract is generally used for projects where there is the ability to produce a fully developed set of detailed design drawings and specifications sufficient to allow for the preparation of a comprehensive bill of quantities which accurately describes and quantifies all elements of labour, fixtures, materials, etc. required to construct a building, and thereby allows the client to have a reasonable certainty about outturn costs. This form suited the needs of the legal claim. Unfortunately, the format of the document required for the defined purposes of justifying the legal claim was not the same as a document that would have been required to tender to undertake the work necessary to restore the building to an acceptable standard. Equally, this form of contract was not necessarily the best form of contract to deliver the project in the most cost-effective manner. From the evidence given to the inquiry, it is clear that there were differences of opinion expressed within the independent expert team and the design team as to the most suitable form of contract, given the level of uncertainty attached to the measured quantities, or even to the nature of work that may be required to be dealt with when new defects could be discovered. The almost doubling of the contract sum from roughly 9.8 million to 18 million is a reflection of the problems in relation to the extent and nature of additional defects that were discovered with the opening up of the project. On the discovery of these defects, there was a need to revise designs or produce new design proposals, to respond to what was found and to have them costed before instructing the contractor. The time required for this added significantly to the cost of prolongation and the length of extension required to the contract period to undertake the additional work involved. These prolongation costs represented a major element of the massive increase in the cost of the contract. The adoption of a pre-construction or two-stage approach to the procurement of the project, as one of the alternatives suggested by one of the independent experts, would have used an approximate bill of quantities to select a contractor. This would have provided a competitive process and indicative cost for the remediation of the then known quantified schedule of defects and a schedule of rates to be used for the different aspects of work that might be required. The tender of this approach would have allowed, before the council would have to decide whether to commit to a full contract, for a first stage of the contract to take place within a prescribed period of time on an agreed fee and cost basis, during which the contractor working under the instruction of the design team would have undertaken the exploratory works in opening up the building necessary to more firmly establish and quantify the nature and extent of the works required. Only then would a cost and programme for the full extent of the works be required to be finalised with the contractor on the basis of the rates in the first stage tender, and this would be submitted for consideration and approval by the council. Until this would be agreed, no further contract would have been let, and the situation that did occur of the council delaying an on-site contract by 5 to 6 months while considering this type of information could have been avoided. The negotiation of the contract price. It is the opinion of the inquiry that in the circumstances of a negotiated tender without competition, the agreed contract sum of 9.898 million would appear to have been a reasonable price for the works as described in the tender documentation, when compared to the pre-tender estimate of 9.5 million. In implementing an open book approach to the tenders invited and received from subcontractors, the council actively sought to mitigate the loss of competition at main contractor level. However, even this approach would not have equated to a situation where there had been a proper competition between main contractors. Inevitably, where there's only one contractor, the client will generally have to pay a premium over market rates. The governance of the council of the remedial works contract. It is the view of the inquiry that the administratively-driven arrangements put in place for the design development processes, pricing, and the subsequent approval processes by the council before instructions could be issued were inappropriately lengthy for a project of this type and did not properly reflect the nature and demands of the contract form used. The ongoing management of this contract required a completely different approach to that required for a greenfield new building where everything could be designed in advance. The project management and design team had to be able to quickly inspect the work and determine the appropriate design responses to what was being discovered as the building was opened up to reveal new defects. Central to this requirement should have been the need for the proactive daily involvement of design leadership of the members of the design team in ensuring the production of fully coordinated and timely design information so as not to cause delay to the progress of the works to the contractor and the risk of incurring resulting additional costs. The major factors in the discovery of additional defects were the widespread defects in the construction of the external walls, necessitating the demolition of the walls to the rotunda, also the need to extend the length of the main swimming pool by demolishing the end wall, and the discovery below ground level of corrosion to sections of steel columns and problems with the drainage systems. A structural report on the adequate tying of blockwork in the external walls of the building was only produced in April 2017, a full 8 months after commencement of the remedial works contract in September 2016. And the decision to proceed with the remedial works was not given until September 2017, a full year after the commencement of the contract. This process took far too long. Given the advance warnings of the need to check for these defects that had been sent to the council as early as March of 2016, it is difficult to explain why this issue was not addressed before construction commenced, or in an event much sooner in the contract process. If it had been possible for the council to have known the true level of defects in the building and the likely cost of dealing with them in advance of commencing the remedial works contract, it is probable that they might not have proceeded with the project and might well have demolished the building and replaced it with a more current facility. The inquiry was surprised that, although it would be an unlikely option, no proper exercise had been sought as part of the options appraisal to establish the cost of demolishing DG1 and building a new facility, potentially to a new and updated brief. However, given the late stage at which a more accurate cost of the project became known, it is the opinion of the inquiry that in the circumstances the council's options were very limited, and the only realistic option for them was to complete the project, particularly when viewed from a funding and programme perspective. Remit 11. The management and maintenance of the building since construction, including advising on whether the current defects should have been found earlier. I have previously stated that from the early stage of the project, there was dissatisfaction about the level of funding for maintenance of the building, including references to poor quality of cleanliness of the building. The photographs in Appendix 3 demonstrate the condition that it subsequently got into. Amongst the many areas that were not properly maintained, both inside and out the building, the one which had the most impact on the remedial works contract was a reported lack of chemical dosing of the water in both the low temperature hot water system and the chilled water system. The inquiry was advised that this was the most likely cause of the widespread internal corrosion found in the pipework of both systems, requiring the majority of the pipework throughout the building having to be stripped out and replaced. The need to do this caused immense disruption to the progress of the work and caused the Council major additional expense. It is a finding of the inquiry that there were failures on the part of the Council to put in place the appropriate funding, systems, expertise and staff resources to provide for the proper maintenance of the facility. This fact contributed to the increase in the required cost and in the work and in the cost of the remedial works contract. It is also a finding of the inquiry that the poor quality of the original construction back here increased significantly the problems and costs of maintaining this building. Recommendations. It is unfortunate that just about everything that could go wrong with the building has happened on this project, despite the best intentions of the Council throughout. The decision by the Council to commission an independent inquiry is indicative of a desire to learn from this hopefully unique, difficult experience and to review your approach to projects of this type. The last section of my report provides the recommendations of the inquiry for future actions. You'll be delighted to hear that I do not intend to go through the list of 30 or so recommendations, other than to list the headings under which they are grouped. The recommendations will relate to, or do relate to, the internal structures and resources for the development of capital projects by the Council, the need for the protection of the quality of design of Council projects, the need for the production of comprehensive business cases for projects, a clarification of the levels of decisions in relation to the development of projects that should be referred to committees of Council, the administration of contracts during the on-site execution of capital projects, the Council's relationship with the design team, the role of building standards within the Council, ensuring the appropriate funding and quality of the maintenance of Council projects, compliance with European regulations and the preparation of pre-tender estimates, learning from construction problems experienced on the DG1 building, and also referring you to the Accounts Commission report on major capital investment in councils, which provides a sound basis for many of the principles needed. That really concludes my presentation of the report. I'm afraid it's a very sad story, and I don't like standing here identifying so many defects that have been identified in the building and in the process of procuring the building. But there is much to learn from, and from my discussion with the Council, I see an appetite for ensuring that those issues are addressed. So thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Professor Cole, and thank you again for all your hard work in this very complex issue. It's indeed a very sorry tale. Can I now invite members to ask Professor Cole any questions resulting from his presentation to us? The next part of this agenda item will be consideration of the report from the Chief Executive, which is how we go forward, how we take the opportunity to learn the lessons that need to be learned and what we need to do. But at this stage, can I invite you to ask any supplementary questions of Professor Cole? Councillor Crothers, I'm giving you a professorship there.
Thanks very much, Leader. No, thanks very much, like yourself, to Professor Cole and his team in regards to it. It was an excellent presentation. I'm sure when I do finally get into the report itself, I'll be able to read a lot better and understand a lot better. And I'm sure it'll be an excellent report as well. I suppose there were so many questions in my mind that have actually been answered, because that was a thorough presentation, to say the least. But I suppose when it comes to the level of information, it sounds like it's certainly on the face of it that you've received a lot of information, you've accessed that, you've analysed it. But was there any restriction? Because one specific point in regards to the decision that the Council made had to be unfettered. So were you absolutely clear in regards to getting information? Were you able to gain and access all the information that you actually needed and required? It sounds like you did, but I think it's all the questions I had listed previously. I think that's maybe for the future report, how the Council takes its position on the back of this information. That's the only question that's probably outlying for me at this moment in time. Was it unfettered?
Yeah, hello. Sorry, just to recap, you're asking whether I got all the information that I needed. found it difficult to get all of the information. We certainly got all the information that we believe was available, but we don't think that all the necessary information was there that should have been there. The contractor, as you know, did not come to talk to us or provide evidence. So inevitably there's significant amounts of internal contractor files that would have been highly relevant, given that it was a design and build contract. But I had no powers, as this was just a public, it was an independent, not a public inquiry. I had no powers to insist on the provision of that information. Everything else was very, very open, and people admitted, recognised some of the things that had gone wrong in the past that shouldn't have gone wrong. One of the key issues, which I don't mention in here, but is mentioned in the report, is the poor quality of the as-built drawings provided with the building. It's a legal requirement to hand over a health and safety file as part of the contract, as well as the CDM regulations. We find that much of that is inaccurate. It doesn't reflect what was actually built. There's missing manuals, making the maintenance of the building very difficult. But we did have access to the as-built drawings as provided, but they were certainly not a proper indication of what was built. Many of the specification issues were changed. What happened during this building is that the subcontractors came in with different proposals during the construction and at very late stages in the construction to change the detail and the way they were going to build the building. And that information was not provided in a structured way to allow us to analyse it. So in some cases, we've had to do quite a bit of forensic research almost ourselves and try and establish exactly what did happen. And it took quite a lot of time to do that. But we got information from everybody that we spoke to, and we didn't see anyone holding back other than from the contractor side.
Councillor Crummett.
No, thanks very much. No, thanks very much for your answer as well. Certainly answers it. I suppose what comes to my mind on the back of what you mentioned, because it's two-sided coin, is what we're saying here. The council has a responsibility in regard to the mistakes made, so as well as the contractor, and that's quite clear. But let's talk about criminal offences, maybe by both sides. I wonder if you could actually go further into detail. He certainly mentioned it anyways. It's something I took a note of, and it's a question I'd highlighted, but I thought it'd come out further report. But just when I've got you on the stand here, and as far as criminal activity from the council and the contractor, can you expand on that at all?
It's completely outside my remit to discuss any issue to do with criminality. You perhaps are referring to the fact that the breach of the building regulations in terms of the failure to have a completion certificate before entering the building. Those are a breach of the legislation. I wouldn't refer to it necessarily as criminality, but certainly as a breach, and as a breach which is quite common, unfortunately, in Scotland and through many building departments, including in the inquiry into the building regulations, into the Edinburgh Schools project. We found that some of the schools hadn't received completion certificates 10 years after they were built. So it is not, unfortunately, an uncommon occurrence in Scotland. It certainly is a breach of the law, yes.
Thanks. Members will recall that I wrote to the Health and Safety Executive and Police Scotland asking them to investigate the possibility of prosecution of the main contractor and for the potentially lethal failings of the complex. The HSC had replied that because nobody had been killed or seriously injured and because it wasn't happening at work, that there was not really anything they could do to take any action. Police Scotland at that point had assigned a detective superintendent to have a look. At that point, he could not identify anything which was possibly the subject of criminal prosecution, but I know that Police Scotland were very interested in the findings of your report, and we will certainly be sending copies of the report both to the HSC and particularly to Police Scotland to see whether indeed they consider that there are now the possibility of criminal prosecution for some of the things which I don't expect Professor Cole to be able to answer that. I think that probably is a matter for the police. Sorry.
I was just going to add to the leader's comment that if the police were to pursue the breach of building regulations in Scotland, they would be doing absolutely nothing else, because it is rife in terms of processes right across Scotland. You may be aware that I've been asked to chair a review of the compliance with building regulations, enforcement of building regulations in Scotland by the government. That is ongoing at the moment, and it will certainly be looking at this issue of the blatant way in which the regulations are not complied with in terms of building standards.
I think there could also be the possibility of criminal negligence given the lack of attention. Anyway, that would be a matter for the police really to look at. Could I have Councillor James and Councillor Maitland?
Thank you, Leader. If I may, I'd first like to welcome back Councillor Dempster. I look forward to disagreeing with him on all possible occasions, and I hope he'll continue to give a robust defence of the indefensible. 9.5 million, the settlement. Given what had been uncovered and was being uncovered at that time, I think it sounds to me quite lenient to say that that was a reasonable settlement. And I mentioned that to someone earlier today. He said, well, they thought that we might have been under significant pressure of legal costs at that point. Do you know, could you characterise what those costs were at that point for me? And could I go on to another question, or would you like to take that one?
Okay, if I could just briefly with that. The advice of the council, as you'll be aware, was legal advice from your council and from your solicitors as to the level of recovery in these cases. That and at that time they were comparing the 9.5 million against, I think, 11.8 million figure, which was their assessment at the time. So they were saying that this is a good offer, that the court, if they proceeded through the court, the litigation process would run on for quite some time, and there would be significant costs attached to that. And I think the briefing to the council also was that there was no assurance as to what the outcome of that might be. And looking at the evidence, I think it was very difficult to refute the case that the council had for defective building work. But that was the advice that the council were given, and the council accepted that advice and took it at the time. What I'm saying in my report is that I find it reasonable on behalf of the council to accept the recommendations of the experts on the basis of the information which was to hand. I don't know what the additional costs would have been, but the council does have detailed costs as to the makeup of the payments made to the legal team.
Thank you. But yes, possibly on the known problems. But I think it's incumbent on the council to have the nous to think, well, we're showing up more problems all the time here. There's every likelihood that there'll be more, and that's why you have a council to take those decisions. And I think somewhere in the report you were implying that it would have been sort of bad etiquette to go fishing for more problems at that time, which seemed also strange.
It was actually a requirement in these processes when it's under litigation that the same opportunity is offered to the independent experts employed by both sides when building has been opened up. Now, there was very limited opening up of this building because the building was in operation. You were still using it as a council. What I've said to you is really it would have been much better if this building had been closed much earlier to allow the proper investigations to be undertaken, and then in that situation you wouldn't have been. So the problem was they couldn't open up a building and close it again when it was being attended by thousands of people every week, or whatever the numbers were, going out to swim and attend it. So the fishing element is one that where there have been a list of defects identified, then those are the ones that were the subject of the claim. And the opening up of the building, and which had to be offered also to the experts to turn up and be there at the same time when a contractor would open up a small hole in the wall and close it, or a small hole in the floor. So they weren't able to do the really detailed investigations that was required, and that really, as I've said, you would have been required by a contractor actually going in, closing the building and opening it up. Because the building was still required to be maintained, they hadn't that opportunity. So they assumed that there was a reasonable assessment in the quantification of the bill at that point. Unfortunately, that assumption was misplaced. The ability to discover the defects that I've described to you, what they were, mostly to do with corrosion of underground stanchions, the drainage problems underground, the construction of the pool, the dimensions of the pool, none of those things actually were able to be properly checked until after the building was closed. And those have led particularly to the extension. The question of the wall ties, in 2016 there was this notification, but prior to that there was no awareness generally in Scotland that this was a defect which was systemic within the industry. So their eyes would not have been on that particular problem. I think there were some indications that they might have picked up on when they looked at some of the photographs in the report. But I think that probably on the basis of the information at the time, it appeared to be a reasonable offer.
Okay, well, and then.
Thank you. £250,000 for the report. It's very comprehensive. However, I think there are two questions that would really be of interest to the public who are paying for it. And one would be, well, they would like to have a whodunit because they would like to point the finger at one of us or somebody within the council. Why isn't that possible? And two, does this give us a basis for further recourse against part of the Keir group to actually get something out of this? Because I think that was part of the argument made when we commissioned this. Because I was a bit sceptical as to whether we actually needed this, but I was told there was a value element in as much as it might be a stepping stone to get something more out of it. So if we don't have named names apart from Keir, who we already knew, and we can't go further with it, I feel that although you've done a great job here, we've wasted our money.
Well, I think there might well be lessons for the council to learn in the future, as opposed to looking back to DG1. The recommendations are to do with how the council can organise itself, the expertise within the council, the way it approaches the management of projects, and that's essentially what the remit was, to look forward to prevent this happening again. And no part of my remit was to find a way to sue Keir for further damages. The legal agreement by the council was in full and final settlement, and those words mean that it was in full and final settlement, so therefore there is very limited recourse. You may want to pay some fortunes to some lawyers to try and find a way to pursue that, but it's in full and final settlement agreement, so that was the legal basis on which the council settled the arrangement. It was unfortunate that they did that, but that was the basis of your agreement.
I think there's lessons for the public sector as a whole in terms of how we go forward and whether or not there needs to be, and you suggested a couple of areas of collaboration, which local authorities and other public sector organisations could ensure that these things didn't happen again. It doesn't make things better for us, but it makes sure that they don't happen again. We've got Councillor Maitland, Councillor Hislop, Councillor Nicholl and Councillor McClelland. Councillor Maitland.
Thank you, Leader. Well, I'm sure I'm not alone in finding this profoundly disappointing. And thank you, Professor Cole, for your lucid report. I remember the excitement and pleasure of local people when this building was first opened, that they got a modern pool because the previous pool had been 33 1/3 yards long, which was not a normal, a normal sort of length in which we could compete nationally. It produced a new performance space and sports halls. It was meant to be really good. You are telling us a terrible lesson that clients actually cannot rely upon the quality assurance of their builders. And I take that on board, large and small, I think probably, because those of us who do small building projects, we cannot, you're saying, really actually totally rely upon people doing what they say they're going to do. Should we have known at that time that it was impossible to transfer risk in the way that we wanted to do from client to contractor, because at that time it was very much a sort of political drive that private was best. We ourselves had had problems with council buildings and time and cost, and I think you probably realise where that's coming from. But I just wonder whether we should have known at the time, or whether it's with the benefit of hindsight. And I'm also interested, please, in what percentage of the maintenance deficit was attributable to damage after it became obvious that the building was not fit for purpose, because you've made quite a lot of play on the fact that we did not maintain. Thank you.
So, yeah. So, just to, if I remember your questions in order, inability to rely on the quality assurance of contractors is based on increasing awareness of this issue in the industry, the lack of proper skills among tradesmen, the lack of a workforce with the skills necessary to support the industry, and the drive by the public sector towards processes which don't ensure that proper independent scrutiny happens. So the lack of clerker works, for example, with the right skills and background to examine projects on behalf of a design team supporting the council. The council didn't have an architect involved in this process, other than Hypolite, who were there to carry out some support to the employer's agent. But we only have 3 reports from them of visiting the sites, all of which identified major problems. But they weren't there inspecting the building in the way that an employer's agent with the full skill set would have done and should have been required to do. The industry is mixed. There are some very, very good contractors, and so it's the fact that you can't rely on them. Many of them will deliver the right, but you can't bet on that. So you have to put appropriate measures in place. The issue of design and build, was it known at the time as a problem? Well, I believe your 2 previous leisure centres, related leisure facilities, were both built through design and build. I think one of them closed for a year, and the other one was found to have significant defects in it as well. So the evidence to the council at that time, based simply on leisure centres, would have been that the 2 projects had failings within them built by design and build. So that issue is perhaps something that should have been known by the council. The briefing to the committee who took the decision on the procurement method was that the quality issue was at greatest risk in using the design and build process, and the drive for cost and quality, cost and time, seemed to have taken over from that very laudable set of objectives that I described at the start, which unfortunately the project completely failed to deliver. In relation to the issue of maintenance, I don't have the figures to hand, but the most significant element of them that ran into excess of £1 million would have been the requirement to replace the corroded hot water pipes and chilled water pipes in the building. And it's not only the work associated with replacing them, but it's the work of actually having to take down other bits of the building to get at them and take them out and replace them. So there's considerable disruption to the work as well. That would probably be one of the most significant areas. But if you look at the photographs, you'll see how the building throughout was in a very poor state of repair. It was the fact that those particular items were specifically excluded by the council, because the design team repeated to us time and time again that they were not allowed to include those items in the tender document.
Thank you. Councillor Hislop, followed by Councillor Nicholl.
In reply to Councillor James, you said that... Sorry, I'll sit a bit closer. In response to Councillor James, you said that it was reasonable, the advice given to us on the back of the timescales and the sort of way it worked. Now, my understanding and my recollection was that we were told there was issues with the building, and was it 2014 that we closed it? There was a period of time when, after we closed it, that we actually did go in and do investigations. So it wasn't prior to that that we knew it was 9.8 million. It was after we'd done the investigations that we had identified 9 point whatever million, or that was a recommendation we got that we should accept. But surely on the back of that there was issues so grave, it would be reasonable. Now, reasonable, my understanding is, if you sit in a bus and you speak to the fella next to you, we found so many difficulties with the building, it would be reasonable for that man to say, did you look further? Now, so wouldn't it have been reasonable to expect our advisors at the time to say 9.8, but that's just because we haven't been right into the bones of this building, and I would recommend that you actually go and have a further look to make sure that you don't have another 9.5 million on top of the 9.5 million you've already identified.
I suppose yes is the answer to your question. The issue, though, was that members of the design team and members of the independent expert group did state that they could not tell the extent of these defects until the contractor went in and opened up the building. The problem was the level of certainty that was attached to the price, and it was the acceptance of the bid was after the tender had been received back from McLaughlin and Harvey, their tender of 10.8 and add-on fees, etc. They compared the 9.5 with an 11.8 expected expenditure when they spoke to you. But in that statement from the QC, he does say that there are no assurances that there are not further defects in the building. It could have turned out that there weren't. It could have been that they found these things out. The fact that the building had been so bad in so many areas would have led some question mark in my business. And the two-stage procurement process, that would have been a better way to have done this, in my opinion, than the standard form of contract where you're presuming you know everything, was recommended also by I think several members of the design team.
Councillor Hislop.
Thank you, Leader. I remember, I think it was sitting over in the back bench over at that side, asking the question of our legal expert, was £200,000 contingency sufficient and we'd know all the faults? And the guy said, that's as good as you're going to get. Now, I asked the question, was there more? And nobody actually said there were issues to come forward. Now, other members were thinking the exact same thing as me. I maybe just got in first. And when you ask an expert, is this what we should be doing? And they say, yes, that's the best you're going to get. You expect that actually to be the best you're going to get with the, no other issues. Now, surely we should have been told at that stage, look, that's the best I can give you on what I've got. Now, I would actually look to see, without opening up, that's the best I can give you, and identify that there was another reason. We never got that on the day.
Records of the inquiry, we have seen notes which states specifically that the true extent of the defects will only be discovered once the main contractor goes on site, and a requirement that the design team should be standing with them when they open that up, so as to establish what the proper design response would be. We've seen those records in the files. Who they were brought to the attention of and who made those decisions that they should not continue with that, I'm not sure. But there certainly were recommendations from members of the design team that they could not tell the extent of the defects until the contractor would open up the building properly. And when you look at the nature of them, they were below ground. Nobody had opened up the ground to know that the stanchions were going to be corroded. The width of the swimming pool, because of the thinness of the waterproofing, which didn't work as a result, actually disguised the fact that they had to extend the length to get in the proper waterproofing into the length of the pool. All of those things were not actually identifiable until people got into the building and opened it up. And what I've said to you is, it would have been better advice to have done that work, closed the building early, done that work properly, found the full extent of the works by a contractor, and then carried out the work.
My understanding was things like the width of the wall, the waterproofing, etc., were checked before we got the final. Because we sat in here, and prior to that, we had seen the walls opened up. We'd seen the holes that had been drilled through the wall to show where the reinforcing rods had been put in too close to the edge. Now, that was prior to us taking the decision on the 9.8 or 9.5 million. That was prior to us taking that decision, not after. So therefore, that must have been identified prior to us taking the decision, and it must have been included in the cost. But now you're saying that didn't happen.
What I said to you was the length of the pool. The accuracy of the length of the pool to achieve the waterproofing requirement of specification was not sufficient. They only discovered that when they'd stripped the full render off the pools and were able to do a full survey of the work. The drilling through the walls was taken account of in parts, only insofar as you were able to open up the pools. So it's the length of the pool that had to be, the wall had to be taken down and moved back. That wasn't in the original tender on which the 10.8 million was agreed for. The drainage underground, defective drainage, wasn't there. The corrosion of the stanchions underneath ground, it wasn't there. So there were lots of other issues found on site when the contractor went on board. Yeah, so the 9.5 million was against the 11.8, but it wasn't. It did not include for those items. Those items were unpredictable. I don't think anyone could have stood here and say, well, we know there's going to be defective drainage. But I said to you, it was highly likely that there would have been because of the defects in the rest of the building, and a different strategy in relation to when you did the investigations and when the contractor actually came in and opened up the work without necessarily having to contract for the full work would have allowed that to happen more appropriately. So I'm just saying a different strategy by the council as opposed to assuming a certainty of price based on exact quantification, which is what that bill of quantities was. You couldn't do that. There was no certainty as to what was going to be found, and yet the procurement model used a bill which relied on that degree of certainty.
Okay, Councillor Nicholl, followed by Councillor McClelland.
Thank you, Leader. Thank you, Professor Cole. Very full report. We'll get time to study it, I hope, before the next debate we have in it, assuming we'll have another debate. 2 or 3 things I've noted down: substandard construction, project manager not there, prematurely accepted by the council, and these are all things which, with hindsight, are very important, and hindsight is a great virtue. It's got 100% vision. But my question is, on the costs of the 42 or 43 million that we've got to in total, less the 9 and a bit that we got from CARE, have you taken into consideration, or has it been taken into consideration, the other costs which have added to it, like when the pool or when the centre had to be temporarily closed on occasions, the hire of a temporary pool, etc. Have these costs been included in that figure, in the 33 million net?
Yes, I asked for these costs from the council, and the council provided a figure of 4.2 million as the additional costs, in addition to the construction costs, initial construction costs and remediation construction costs. There was an additional cost of 4.2 million as calculated by the council in that 42 million pound figure.
They're detailed on page 191, the breakdown of that. Councillor McClelland.
Leader, I haven't had a chance to read it all yet.
I know, I appreciate that. I'm sorry, I just saw it by mistake. Councillor McClelland, followed by Councillor Doogie Campbell.
Thank you very much, Leader. Professor Cole, I'd like to congratulate you on the extent of the report. I remember the deliberations we had here in this room, and it was quite, I would say, eye-opening for a newly elected member at the time to see the goings-on here in Chamber. And I remember quite a bit about the debate, but I was very passionate in supporting the need for this report. This report follows on from a situation we had in Edinburgh, where we saw the extent of the substandard work in those 17 schools. The report that you've highlighted here, it's incredible when you look at the faults and the number of basic faults that we should expect from a top construction company to deliver. Now, whether it's design or build or other JITC contract or whatever, that does not take away from their responsibilities to deliver the product that is fit for purpose. I believe that we were extremely lucky that no one was hurt. When we see the extent and the lack of structure in that building with the absence of the wall ties and the fireproofing, Lord help us if there'd been a fire in that building when it was fully occupied at an event. So thank you very much for that report. Now, in terms of who done it, I don't think it matters one toss who done it. Your remit was to give us an unfettered account. Let's put aside that primary fault of the main contractor. You've highlighted to us 34 recommendations at the end of that report that we as a council, that is the information that we needed from this report, or we'd never be able to put it right. So without that detail, we don't need whodunit. What we need to do is get into that due process, tackle our failings, and that is the important piece of next work. You have given us the stepping stone for us to actually deliver proper outcomes.
No, we're not in debate, we're in questions, but I think...
Yeah.
Professor Cole, do you want to comment?
Yeah, and I have a question after that, Leader.
Okay.
My question is to Professor Cole. With your level of experience, Professor Cole, in the investigations you've had so far and your ongoing investigations, I am quite alarmed about the points that you raise at 216, 217, and the lack of expertise and experience we've got across the piece. And I'm talking about everything from the hands-on, from a tradesman, right to the professional expertise. And I'm just wondering what you actually think that we can actually do as a country to start to put this right.
I think following the Edinburgh report that you referred to, the Scottish Government have taken that very seriously. I and my colleagues are attending regular ministerial summits with the Minister involved, looking at what the industry can do, and the government have asked for responses from right across the sector, from local authorities like yourselves, from the construction industry, from the professional bodies, from all of those concerned, because it is recognised that the industry is at a very poor point in relation to quality at the moment, and that steps need to be taken, and that very much goes from the bottom end right up to the top in terms of the level of experience of managers in building sites, the skill of tradesmen, the apprenticeship schemes have been cut back, potentially the funding of training, the use of single contract, self-employed builders, labourers just turning up, nobody knowing who is working on the site and what skills they actually have, and the lack of supervisory skills. Primarily, there's been a cutback by the public sector in terms of the quality mechanisms to protect the quality of work, and we need to go back and put that scrutiny in and pay for it, because that is a saving that you will not benefit from. And unfortunately, that cutback has been standard across lots of government departments where the skills have been lost to carry out that work and to be the intelligent customer. The council needs to ensure that if it is a customer for buildings in the future, that it is a properly equipped and expert customer to act in that intelligent role.
Thank you. Councillor Dougie Campbell's indicated he has withdrawn his question.
Yes, Leader. Councillor McClellan's pretty much covered what I was going to say, so there's no need for a question. Okay,
Councillor Davidson, followed by Councillor Charters.
Thank you, Leader. I'll add my thanks to you, Professor Coles, for the piece of work that you have done, which I think is fair, balanced, and incredibly detailed. I wanted to go back to the compare and contrast that you offered at the beginning of what you had to say, comparing this building with DG1. Which, the contrast is almost heartbreaking, to be honest with you. And the point that you made about the start of the process for DG1 being informed by an ambition to have a quality building, and that at some point that was lost further along the line, or was maybe subordinated to the need for meeting the time and the cost that had been set out. Time and cost pressures are always going to be an issue for any public body, well, any client on any building project, but I guess projects in the public eye even more so. I absolutely accept what you say about quality. So my question is, have you an insight into how best we start rebalancing that, given that those pressures of time and cost are always going to be a continuing problem?
I think this is one of the most fundamental questions we're facing us all, particularly people in public sector who feel that they have to be seen to be efficient and get value for money. But that does not mean paying less than the cost of doing something. And what we actually, I think, are now doing is pushing the cost of building down to such a level that contractors are selecting and choosing to work with the cheapest subcontractor who will employ the lowest level of supervision and the poorest quality of workmanship and tools and materials. So we need to understand that quality in a building is something that goes on and continues to give, like this building has over 100 years later, where we're sitting in this room. We can't sit in the equivalent room of the building that was built a few years ago down the road because it's been rebuilt. When this building was being built, people took a view as to how they wanted to protect the quality by the way they procured it. Councils now go for procurement methods which seem to offer them the quick cost and time. Now, as you see in this case, that was not a good decision because cost and time failed miserably, despite the fact that was the objective. But after a building's open for 5 years or 10 years, how many people ever come back to you and say, well, that building, finished late it should have been finished in January, but it actually finished in April. Nobody's worried about that 5 or 10 years later. If it went up in price by £1 million as opposed to maybe 12 million went to 13 million pounds or 14 million pounds, that level of excess in 5 or 10 years, nobody was going to question. What they will question is this building doing what it's supposed to do? Is it enhancing the quality of the environment? Is it enhancing the quality of people's lives who use it? Is it serving the community? Is it doing the purpose it was intended to? Buildings aren't things that you just procure like bags of sugar, and unfortunately that's the way it's become. There's an expertise involved. We have to be thinking about design. I think councils have a duty to take on the patronage of good design to enhance their towns and to improve the quality of the ratepayers in those towns by the way that they provide their buildings. And I think the focus on cost and time has really led to this movement away from quality, which ultimately is the only thing that counts in the end of the day. If the building isn't doing what it was intended to do, it doesn't matter how cheap it was or how quickly it was delivered. And you have to get the right project. If you go into a garage and you think you're going to buy a new BMW and the guy says, well, here's one here and it costs $4,000. If you pay for it and buy it and drive that car out, you bloody well know that car is going to stop within 5 miles down the road or the wheels are going to fall off because you can't buy something for less than it costs. And that's what we're doing with buildings today. We're actually trying to buy things at a price that does not put a proper profit into it for the contractor, allow him to pay the proper rates to his workmen, allow him to pay for the proper materials. So there's shortcut all the way. And the use of the term value engineering, that is now sort of common in the industry. Value engineering is really just stripping out quality. And that's what is done to virtually every project now in the design process. And we have to learn, as our ancestors did, and as your ancestors here. I doubt if there's anyone still here who built this building. But probably after I talk, you feel as if you've been here that long. But we really do need to learn from the past and see what all the great buildings that we enjoy now were done by previous generations. We have to build buildings of that quality for future generations, and we're failing to do so miserably. We need to get our eye back on the quality ball. And if you build less buildings, but you build good ones, that will pay for you in the long run rather than build a whole lot that you have to knock down within 5 or 10 years.
Councillor Charters, followed by Councillor Tate.
Very, very lucid report. It's profoundly awful to see what went on, but you have highlighted. At the beginning, you reminded us that you'd been carried out the inspection of Edinburgh schools. Our current council is heavily involved in a big school build down here, and I wonder whether you'd be good enough to send us a copy of your report from Edinburgh so that we can all look at it and make sure that we are not committing the same mistake twice and that we have safe schools for our pupils.
That report is actually on the internet, so you can, if you go into the Edinburgh Council or you just put in Edinburgh Schools Inquiry or Call Inquiry, it will come up and you can download it from the internet, so it's already there. I don't have any copies of it, but I know Edinburgh Council have still some copies of it, and I'm sure they would be happy to provide you a hard copy of it. But the issue about that report is it was limited. It was looking at the wall construction. So it wasn't covering the full gamut of defects that were found in this building. But the points are significant, and I believe the council are probably pretty much aware of the findings of that report. And building control and clerks of works and architects around the country are actually now looking with much greater scrutiny at the internal construction of walls, particularly, and at fire stopping, as a result of that report, which is gratifying to some degree. But I don't know how long that goes on, and the memory is short, and people will go back to their bad habits unless somebody is watching them. And for that, you need to pay for independent scrutiny to protect the quality of the buildings you're buying.
Councillor Tate, followed by
Professor Cole. Here we go. I have a slight concern, actually, because he did state in your presentation that you haven't checked all the building for defects. And I'm just wondering if the foundations and the underbuild was ever checked, because in my opinion, that is one of the most important places of a building.
This was something that was looked into by the independent experts, and we were advised that as far as they were concerned, they were happy with the construction of the foundations, including the structural team from the council who actually looked at it at the time. So we did get reasonable reassurances on that. There doesn't appear to have been significant movement in the foundations at all. There is one structural crack across the back of the building, which has been addressed as part of the remedial works. The reports that we received told us that the subcontractor for the foundations was very competent, and the work was done to a much higher standard than subsequently the superstructure. But now, and the thing is that none of us can really check the foundations now unless you want to go back and dig up the building again. This is the problem, that at some point or other you have to assume that something was done right, otherwise you'd have knocked the building down from scratch, which maybe should have been done at an early stage, but you weren't in a position to understand that need at the time, and I understand why the current arrangements have happened.
Thank you, Councillor Tate.
I mean, you did see the paperwork in this, did we? You know, when the concrete goes onto a site like there is paperwork there. So he did see the paperwork that was produced when the concrete was laid.
The foundations? No, I didn't see that, no. Do you see that? Yeah. Stuart was a structural engineer. He advised me on the project. So, yeah. So we're reasonably assured, but there's no guarantees in this business. Yeah. As unfortunately we found out with this building.
I think I started off more reassured at the beginning of that answer than at the end, perhaps. Councillor Scobie, followed by Councillor Johnson.
Sorry, test it working. Councillor Cole, I get a sense of deja vu when you mentioned value engineering, in particular two projects on the waterfront in Stranraer that was reduced and dimensions changed, and really what we ended up with. But in terms of looking at, and you gave broad headings as to your recommendations, and there's a number, you know, when you look at the body of your recommendations, there's a number of reviews, recommendations of all sorts, and you made reference in your presentation, which was quite illuminating, to Prince 2, and how we were almost instructed that that was the procedure, and whether that was the correct procedure, and there's recommendations under the administration of control during the execution of capital projects. Again, in terms of the review, and similar to the role of the building standards. And I don't want to detract from the swimming pool, DG1, but there are other issues, and you made reference to it that Scotland's very poor in terms of completion certificates, and yet our department, and I refer to the building department and your recommendation under Recommendation 7.2, and I quote, "It is also recommended that a review be undertaken of the capacity and level of available expertise in the Building Standards Department so as to ensure its capability of delivering the required quality of service consistent with the procedural requirements for the legislation and the level of demand for these services. And as I say, I don't want to detract, but we've also got within the building standards a responsibility in new build of social housing, where a completion certificate is issued. And I well remember raising the issue in that respect, that there was no completion certificate by the time that tenants were being let and took occupancy of the particular building. In this respect, with a number of cuts in public service and the need to save on money in departments looking at it, you know, just how big a risk is the council running at under 7.2, where if I take Stranraer, we are down, I think, to one building control officer in that department. And whether you would want to opinionate on all your recommendations that are here, whether it does justice to your report, and it's slightly been touched on by other members, whether we are doing justice to your report and your recommendations and reviews, if 42 are trying to do it, whether indeed, and this may be for debate, whether indeed in your opinion 42 can do it, or whether it needs a much smaller committee. I know we've got audit and risk, but audit and risk is primarily made up of opposition or backbenchers, and none of the administration on that. Just in your opinion, whether indeed 42 could you do justice to your report, or whether you've got an opinion on it.
Sorry, the 42 you're referring to is?
Full council.
Oh, sorry.
43, I may have got my figures wrong. 43 as a full council, or whether you have an opinion in terms of how we do justice to all the recommendations that are here before us. You only give a broad heading, but when you start to look at the body, then there is a number of reviews, recommendations, etc.
Yeah. I haven't actually formed a view as to how best the council would undertake that. It's something which I'm sure the chief executive may well express some views on. And I'd have certainly thought that it was subgroups rather than a major group that would be responsible for looking at each of the individual aspects that I've identified. I think it should come from the executive staff of the council primarily to carry out that work and come to committees with presentations and proposals. Again, many of the things associated with this aren't fixable overnight. You know, there's the issue of building up the appropriate level of expertise and deciding what that looks like. It's going to take a little bit of time. I think what the council needs to have are short-term mechanisms to protect themselves from the risks associated with this until they finally determine what the ultimate model of their delivery of these services should look like. There's many different ways to do it. You could bring in consultancy, but you know, if you can do it internally, it would certainly be much preferable and much cheaper. But it would be good to maybe, I think, have joined up discussions with other local authorities which are effectively going through the same issues. And I think there probably has been enough sharing of those issues across local authorities in Scotland in the past. Because time and time again, when I mention anything, I hear somebody saying, oh yes, that happened to us too. So we do know that these problems aren't just Dumfries and Galloway, they're much, much wider. And I think collaborative working, at least some sort of information on that might help shape your views as to what the best way forward is.
In fact, we will discuss how we respond, the mechanism for responding to your findings when we discuss the Chief Executive's paper just after your presentation. Councillor Johnson.
Thank you, Leader. Thank you very much, Professor Cole. It's been very interesting. Particularly enjoyed your passion for the building industry and your drive, I hope, to increase quality standards throughout the industry. It's something I feel quite strongly about in my own industry as well. But it does seem a bit surprising that we're in a situation where we only have one tenderer for some of these jobs. It's not a very comfortable position, and do you think potentially that should have set alarm bells ringing slightly from the purchasing angle? And also, how significant do you think not following the OJ rules for tendering, did it make any difference? Do you think there was a chance of having more tenderers if things have been put through properly?
Yeah, it's difficult to, analyse what might have happened, as opposed to what did happen. If we go back to the initial tender, which didn't comply with the European rules, it also hadn't taken account of the investigations that were necessary to be carried out when the building closed, because those tenders came back before the building was closed on the 8th or 6th of October 2014. So therefore, the tender would not have been adequately descriptive of the work that was done. So you'd already been problems with that tender anyway. So in one sense, you could say it was fortuitous that was abandoned and the extra work was done to be added into the contract. But at the same time, you had 4 contractors who seemed to be, 3 of them seemed to be pretty interested in the work. The price of the 4th, who happened to be McLaughlin and Harvey, was significantly the outlier and much more expensive than the rest. So it was perhaps disappointing that they were the only people who tendered for the second project. The issue of single tender, I was talking about that earlier today as to why did we only get one at that stage, and there was a lot of work across the industry at the time. It was, and this is not an easy project, a difficult project for people to take on, and they probably found difficulty in pricing it, and looking at the building to see just what they were taking on in terms of risk. So I can understand why people mightn't have been too keen on it. The 3 people who didn't come back the second time might well have just been annoyed that the project had been abandoned the first time. But the issue in relation to that is that there should be always a check before the public sector goes to tender to ensure that the price of the project isn't going to exceed the European limit. Otherwise, there is a risk of challenge of other contractors when you do appoint. So I think the council probably had no option but to go back out again. But in one sense, you might have been able to negotiate a better outcome with that tenderer than with McLaughlin and Harvey to account for all the additional changes that happened. The pricing might have been lower. But I still don't think it was the right procurement model to go with.
Thank you, Councillor McGregor.
Thank you, Leader. First of all, I make reference to 6.63 on page 301 in relation to the demolition. Now, this has been a massive frustration for me right along the way. At the £9.5 million stage, we asked, could we demolish it? And we're told that if we did that, we wouldn't get compensation from Kier. So it was left at that. We then moved on to the £18.5 million stage of the project and asked again, are we doing the right thing? Should we now consider demolition? And we're told in that meeting, both professionally and politically, that that wasn't an option because we hadn't worked it up as an option. And I think that's been a huge frustration for an awful lot of us. You've actually said that there are no guarantees, the foundations, you've had reasonable reassurances, but none of it has been checked. Are we at a tipping point now where if we continue to do what we do, to the tune of your estimated 42 million, that we could be here in a year's time having the same discussion for another 10 million? At what point do we actually say, stop, have another look? Because I'm still concerned that in a year's time we'll be at 50 million and then 60 million with a building which public have no faith in. And I've asked for it repeatedly and it's been denied repeatedly.
The situation in which the inquiry found itself, when we started, you were so deep into the project that there was no going back. I think at that point you really had to proceed. The balance of risk, and I say this obviously in the shoes of many people who stood in front of this room and told you everything was covered in the past. I won't give you that assurance. I don't know. What I'm saying the balance of risk is, in looking at it, that they are now working their way up as opposed to, and out of the building, as opposed to going down and finding more stuff. The main risks now would probably be more associated with mechanical and electrical installations in the building that would need to be properly tested out and see whether they need to be replaced. I still think there's 1 or 2 issues which are outlying. Now, since I stopped looking at the building, I'm sure things have moved on, and Chief Executive will be able to tell you that, but there were some issues about the boilers replacement, about the size of the flue having to be extended, about other issues that do need to be, or did need to be resolved. I don't know whether they have been yet. So there's still a little bit of variation, and I wouldn't imagine that it's completely out of the woods yet, but I think the process of putting on a full-time project manager and a focused approach to it, and the Chief Executive getting deeply involved in the delivery of the project, has certainly brought a new focus to it that was required. There's no certainties, but I don't think and I say this and hopefully you won't be able to say what you told me, I don't think your 40 or 50 million pound, sorry, your 50 or 60 million pound will arise. There may be variation on the edge. The one thing I would say, and this goes back to my statement about quality, it is important that even though this building all along the line of the council was, we'll only do the defects, we're going to do nothing else, the public haven't seen that amount of money spent on a building. We'll expect to see a building that is effectively like a new building. So I knew at the time when I was originally involved, end of last year, that there were still some outstanding issues that weren't being addressed in terms of general upgrading of materials, etc. But I know that from speaking to the Chief Executive today, that there are thoughts as to how that might possibly be addressed. But I think as a council, you'll all be criticised heavily of having spent £21 million on a building and the public go into it and half of it looks as if it hasn't been maintained. You know, you really do need to make sure that the building is right, and whether that needs another, and I'm not going to put monies on it, but if it needs another 500,000 or 100,000 or whatever to do that, it would at this stage be a good investment on top of what you've done. Because if you don't do that, areas that haven't been maintained and aren't fixed will require being fixed and maintained in a short time.
So fundamentally what you're saying is that your estimate of 42 million is merely an estimate at this stage. It could escalate potentially within a buffer area.
On this contract form, the way it is now, there's no guarantee of the final outturn cost until you sign the final certificate with the contractor. He'll be paid for whatever works you ask him to do from now on.
Maybe we'll be aware that we have a much stricter form of scrutiny and a much stricter regime of negotiation with the contractor since our full-time project manager was appointed in the autumn, and he is reporting regularly to council on his progress. If there's nobody else, can I ask just two very brief questions actually on slightly broader issues? Your recommendation 10.1 suggests that local authorities and other public sector organisations cooperate in the production and sharing of a list of frequently occurring defects, such as the external masonry and fire stopping. And also in 1.3, you say that one council on their own may not have the necessary level of expertise, and I'm sure that's true of other public sector organisations, required for major construction projects, and we should consider sharing resources and enter arrangements with other public sector organisations to maintain or provide expertise. I'm wondering how you would foresee that type of recommendation being taken forward, because it needs a lead organisation to do it. I don't think you can think councils together somehow will come forward with this. So I wonder whether you see that as being the responsibility of COSLAW or the Improvement Service or possibly the Futures Trust or the hub arrangements. How would you see that being taken forward?
The issue of the collaboration with other councils, well, it could be a two-way collaboration with a nearby council, whereby you talk to each other, understand what your range of expertise are within each council. And I think one of the problems with a council of this size is that, particularly because of this problem of this project, you're not going to have a major capital programme moving ahead probably for a while. So to maintain a highly qualified and expert group in the council when there isn't a major capital programme does create difficulties, because people want career opportunities. They don't want to just be sitting around waiting for the next major building coming along in 10 years' time. Whereas if a group of councils have a series of buildings, it may be that they can liaise between them to build that expertise and have a sufficient flow of projects through that expertise to ensure that they're kept up to date, that they are active and it's attractive work for the people, because good people to do this work won't come easily. So that is just some of the thoughts, and I do believe that in central government there are some views that might be something which is required, that there are maybe the need for fewer bodies procuring, but using other bodies. The one thing I do say though in the report there is that it's critical, however, that the council retain the ability to be an intelligent customer at whatever level, that it knows to ask the right questions, that it knows who is appointing, that it's able to challenge those people who are doing the work for it to make sure that the work is being carried out properly. And I think that's something you have to retain. But I do see opportunities for smaller councils perhaps to come together and share a group, and it would have to be in some just arrangement between them. I don't necessarily see it as something coming from the centre. The second point, the first point you raised was about the sharing of information and defects. And I think, for example, if we go back to the Edinburgh schools, which maybe quoted too much today, but if you go back to the Edinburgh schools, there have been 4 collapses of walls with exactly the same problems as occurred at the Oxgang school in the 4 years previous to that in local council areas. I don't think any of that information was shared. If that information had been shared, people might have been able to take preemptive steps on a much earlier date. So I think it's a duty on local authorities when they come across issues which tend to be systemic in nature to raise them as a checkpoint. It's something I used to do myself. I was responsible for procurement of hospitals, a lot of hospitals, and we did share between projects all the information, and there were feedback sheets to allow people to say, well, watch out for this. This is something that seems to be happening all the time. So I think there are opportunities for learning, and if you're not having enough projects going through and there are people involved in them in the level of detail, effectively people will get stale. So you do need to make sure that people are being kept engaged in real work, so as they can actually be valuable when the projects come along. My worry with you is that I don't think your capital programme going forward is tremendously large.
Couldn't catch that because I was looking at the...
Hopefully that stops the white sands in its tracks.
It may be starting again. Any further questions for Professor Coles before we move on? If not, many thanks indeed to Professor Coles and to his 2 colleagues for all your hard work and for your very detailed presentation today and for answering the questions of members. Thank you very much. We're now going to go on to consider the paper from the Chief Executive on the independent inquiry. The report requests full Council consideration of the findings which have been presented today and the recommendations within the inquiry report which has now been presented to us, and also suggests a way forward to consider those findings. Chief Executive, do you wish to say something to your report?
Thank you, Leader. It was quite a brief paper because obviously that wait for direction from members following this. In setting up the executive group that Professor Cole referred to, I was envisaging that would have both external membership to give that independent perspective, but also peer support, because obviously drawing on the work of either other councils or perhaps the NHS who've just completed a hospital with different processes to bring that in. And I think that what I would be suggesting to members is that it's a rolling report aligned to the regular reports, perhaps to full council, as much as that some of the reports would be embedding current practice, some are quite technical, the recommendations are technically complex and will need seriously thought through, and some draw on national work, and I'm thinking of the building standard support that's now been put in this week to Edinburgh, following on Councillor Scobie's point about, what are the points, what is the proposals there, so we don't reinvent the wheel. Is that going to create a national building standards organisation? Should the, as they say, the polluter, but should the person responsible for the major capital expenditure pay an extra for proper building standards advice rather than the way we currently fund it? So there's that issues there. And I think that looking at the breadth of the recommendations, it would fit nicely into some we can report immediately, some medium term, some long term. That's why my recommendation would be full council to keep all members cited on this very important issue as we move forward. We certainly hope for another major investment for our capital boost, potentially for a new school in Dumfries and other school projects. So certainly, we'd certainly want to make sure that we had a very sustainable process. But I think also in recognising Professor Colt's valid point, the shortage of skills in Scotland, the inability to create that capacity sustainably within a council, we'd need to think creatively, but on a sustainable and fundable basis. So I think there's a range of issues there I'd want to, and that's why I think the regular reporting to full council allows that opportunity as recommendations are implemented for members to receive that promptly and not wait to the end of a process to receive recommendations. Also perhaps to direct further work at that point. So that's just the basis of what I meant. I think obviously members' hands to adjust the recommendations as they see fit following debate.
In your recommendation 2.2, you talk about an officer working group, but it's actually, you're proposing an executive group which has external people.
Yes,
involved
which
in it.
I would obviously discuss the scope of that with elected members as we develop, share that with elected members as we develop the thinking around that.
Okay, can I invite members to ask questions? Councillor Driver.
Thanks very much, Chair. And obviously being this year's chair of APSI, and there's always the improvement service up at Cosla as well. I would perhaps suggest to the Chief Executive that potentially there is opportunity there to get some of that advisory capacity within the groups. I'm just wondering if we'd be willing to take that on.
Certainly, I've got an eye on the saw the full report this morning when I came in because I was out Thursday, Friday of last week. So therefore, that's part of the sort of last debrief with Professor Cole, just to pick his brain before he disappears. But certainly to seek the widest possible representation, because I think that we have a particular problem, but it does have a national resonance. Because I cannot believe that at least one of the 30-odd failings that on that diagram are not present in other buildings that were up at the same time with the same builders and same subcontractors. So certainly I'd be looking for the widest, and that's why I would come back to members when I've had a chance to really think through who are the best people to be involved. Not talking about a very expensive process. I think it's just how do you pick the best brains in Scotland to come back to members with solutions.
Thank you, Leader. I think looking at the agenda itself, I did pick up some points earlier in regards to protocols, governance, so on and so forth, but after hearing the extent of the information, the presentation, the questions, the answers, so on and so forth, but I mean, 2.1 and 2.2 is really inconsequential to me. It's 2.3 I think that we as elected members need to be focusing on. And when does that next report come back? Is it in a month's time? Is it or do we have to wait till the 26th of June? We haven't had a chance, and I'll stick to that, to consider this document itself. So, I mean, the quicker it comes back to me and having a fuller understanding how we will take it forward, we might take a view, we do think actually maybe I might have a special meeting, but we might have like the Audit, Risk and Scrutiny Committee look at this as well before it's referred back to full council, or a subcommittee set up to give it that level of importance that it really needs. So I would like, I mean, if it was in a month's time, I'd be absolutely delighted with that, and I would move that if necessary. But to wait a couple of months, the level of importance gives us a good 3 weeks if we see another meeting back here in 4 weeks' time to actually read, digest this, and Gavin could then, as Chief Executive Officer, can tell us in regards to 2.2 how that's working, the membership, how we can possibly progress this in the best way possible.
Could you maybe advise what you think the sort of timescale for these sorts of discussions might be?
I certainly don't intend advising you the politics of it, but certainly I think that's why I was suggesting a rolling programme, that actually we'd be able to address some of the recommendations rather reasonably quickly. Others are more complex, so we regularly report to full council on DG1 to add it to that or any other mechanism that members would wish to take forward. So therefore the proposal would be we address the findings, the recommendations, so members have a chance to debate it, and how we would intend to implement it. So therefore we would take it at those stages, but that'd be in members' hands as how they would wish the member to take it forward. I would just say a fulsome report in 3 weeks, considering that would have to be probably drafted in the next week, is not possible, but certainly my idea that certainly a number of recommendations we could report on at the next available full council.
Councillor Hislop.
Thank you, Leader. I'm just wondering, would one of the options for taking this forward for a sounding board be the Business Transformation Steering Group? There was issues with regard to the level of expertise that we have currently, so we would need to find a plan to actually implement a new structure possibly. And we also have issues with regard, I think, in the future with building control through how we deliver that service. Maybe we need to bring more people in. That's something we need to transform that service. So as a sounding board, to let members have an access to this before coming to full council back and forward, so that officers would get our feelings as well. Maybe the Business Transformation Steering Group would be somewhere to put this initially.
I think the Transformation Steering Group was more looking at sort of budgetary issues and the transformation of services, but whether there's a possibility of...
I think if members are wanting more scrutiny, it'd be up for members to determine the structure that they would wish to move forward in partnership. I think the Business Transformation Steering Group, there's a problem that members have just agreed I'm a member of it, so therefore it'd be uncomfortable to be leading a piece of work to report to myself. Also with the trade unions on it, and actually that might not, they were there because we're talking about services, so therefore if members wish another scrutiny, there's plenty of models available to members to have that scrutiny they could report back to full council, so members are able to have a proper scrutiny of it before it comes back, but with members' hands as to how they'd want to take that forward. But I think the business transformation, I think to dilute a £40 million piece of work would perhaps not be the best use of the time. But another mechanism may well come forward from debate.
Any further thoughts from Councillor Wilson and Councillor Driver again?
I think there's been a number of suggestions put forward about how to, take this forward. Although the truth of the matter is that all of us here have had, 2 days to have a read of the report. There's a 400-page report in front of us that is probably going to take some time to trail through and actually fully understand. And so to be able to determine what the best mechanism is of actually implementing the recommendations and fully digesting the report probably is not going to come to us today. Whatever mechanism we decide to take forward is most probably not going to be the correct one because we haven't had that chance to actually consider the full details of the report. I think what would be important is to make sure there's a report back to full council or to the relevant committee as soon as possible so that we can have that, but most importantly have that opportunity to fully digest the report and the recommendations.
Thank you, Leader. I think effectively just to follow on from that, I mean, we've been given custody of the report now. It's been handed over to us by Professor Cole, so it's up to us now to get our heads around it properly and take our time in doing that. I think I don't think it particularly signified whether we had it 2 days or 3 days before the meeting, or whether we had to read it in a room or take it home or whatever the arrangements were or were not. That doesn't actually matter. It's been formally presented to us. We've been led through it, I think, very thoroughly and competently. We have a better understanding of the major facets of it now than we did. I suspect that we'll also discover all sorts of other things that we wish to understand and question as we get a chance to go through it in due course. I think that the way forward that's been outlined is, broadly speaking, a sensible one. I think that just as DG1 remains the property of full council, I think that the response to the inquiry's findings should remain the responsibility of full council. I think that that's the best home for it, and I think that the Business Transformation Steering Group is possibly somewhere that some of the outcomes of the work that is done now will have to be considered with regard to service transformation and the way in which we look at some particular services in future, perhaps building standards, who knows. But I'm not sure that that's the starting point for this piece of work. I think the starting point is the panel that the Chief Executive has outlined. I think that external participation in that is essential. I think we will benefit from that, and it continues the practice we've established so far and up until now, which was at one point unanimous, but of course hasn't continued in that way, which was to seek independent advice and input into what we were doing, and that at all times it's reporting back to us at full council. I think that's important. Now, potentially, if we're getting the next report to our next full council, it may be very interim and broad outline, but it will represent a starting point. And I think that's a good way to go forward. I'm happy to move if that is so required.
Okay. Any further comment? Councillor Carruthers?
Taking into consideration everything that's been said, I think maybe the Deputy Leader's put forward a proposal that we could agree with. It just would make sure that politically we understand as that's coming forward to the next full council, we've got some level of input, you could say, into that, so we fully understand what's coming in front of us next time. Like I say, there's no massive projects, that was outlined earlier, no massive capital projects that will be affected by the outcome of our findings immediately anyways.
Okay. So are members content to go with the recommendations? Great, thanks.
Are we going at the next full council? It's not explicit.
Is it possible, Leader, just to clarify what members are looking for at the next full council? I mean, is it to reconsider the report, or is it to a paper that's how we would intend to take forward the detailed scrutiny and deliberation on this report? I mean, I'm trying to, but if that's what members are looking for.
Right. Okay. Councillor Ferguson.
Thanks very much. I thought this was going to be a simple process, because my understanding here is Professor Cole's work will influence us, right? So it would make sense for the Chief to take forward the recommendations, work what the recommendations are, and then that will then give us a view on how, as a council, we take everything forward. And I think if we don't do that, we're not paying justice to council, to Professor Cole's work report. So for me, I actually think the sensible way forward here is, as per the recommendations, allow the Chief to take this away, work something up to come back to whichever committee, the first one, if at all possible, and how they see we're going to take that forward. Because we can't, I would suggest, the Business Transformation Group, for example, can't influence Professor Cole's report. It's the other way around. So whatever comes out of Professor Cole's work that the Chief and the group bring forward may have an impact, absolutely right, either on the Business Transformation Group, right, if that's appropriate. If not, then it's two separate furrows we'll have to plough.
Councillor McGregor.
Thank you, Leader. Just to try and be helpful. I wonder if at 2.2 we shouldn't be changing it from Officer Working Group to Executive Working Group, and that would solve that. And I think part of the reason for that is to bring us back ideas of who would populate that executive group as well. So I think that maybe needs to be embedded within 2.2, that you would bring ideas or recommendations forward, as Archie said, with various outside bodies as to who would populate that executive group. And at 2.3, I suspect that if we have on the actions that the Council is taking with regards, if we were to change that is taking would be to would wish to take, that might solve that problem. Because it kind of implies, as is, that the Chief Exec's going to bring back a report in 2 months telling us exactly what the Council's going to do, rather than us making a decision as to what we would wish the Council to do.
They seem sensible amendments. Councillor Crothers and Councillor Driver.
I mean, I'm quite content with the 2.2, but I think at 2.3, I thought it was outlined fairly clearly. I think maybe Councillor Ferguson touched on that already. And it's about understanding the recommendations from within with the appendix, the report itself. How are we actually complying with them right now? What do we need to do to change to get up to date? Because I think some of them recommendations, I think at a point in time we've maybe superseded them. Not all of them, but some of them. So it's as much an update report where we're now and how we'll go forward and actually implement the recommendations contained within the appendix, Professor Cole's report.
Councillor Driver.
Thanks very much, Sharon. I agree with Gail on the way to go forward, but I would imagine looking at this is, a quick look on Friday and a look today at the recommendations. There may be some work already being done on the recommendations. There may be some already in place on the recommendations, and to bring that information back to full council would be a good idea as well.
Any further contributions? Chief Executive, do you feel you have sufficient steer now from members?
Absolutely.
That's the way forward. Okay, done. Okay. Okay, maybe. We're going to move on to another item of business. So, Professor Cole and colleagues, if you wish to leave, please do. And many thanks for your work. Thank you. Okay, as I indicated at the beginning of the meeting, I've agreed to admit a motion submitted by Councillor Sean Marshall and seconded by Councillor Henry McClelland as an item of late and urgent business. The motion concerns the recent announcement made by Young Seafood regarding the Pinny site in Annan, and it is a matter of significant importance which the Council needs to consider formally without delay. First, I think we probably need to agree to withdraw delegation from the Economy, Environment and Infrastructure Committee in order to consider this motion. So our members agreed to withdraw delegation from the EI Committee. Great. Okay. Can I invite Councillor Marshall to move his motion?
Yeah, thanks, Leader Council, for allowing this to be heard as a late item. As many members will know, the Young's announcement at the beginning of April to close the Pinny site in Annan and the loss of potentially 430 to 700 jobs will have a devastating effect on the local economy, particularly in Annan and surrounding DG area, which goes as far as Eastriggs. Dumfries and Galloway Council, the Scottish Government and local politicians from all political parties at all levels are working together and have formed a ministerial action group which has been formed to identify 4 key work streams. These are, the first one is persuading Youngs to retain natural salmon production in Annan instead of transfer to the Grimsby plant. Now, talks are ongoing, and I know there was meetings again today, and a lot of politicians have taken the opportunity to meet with the Chief Executive of Pinnies, Bill Showalter. Certainly I met with him a couple of weeks ago. My feeling was that this would be very hard to achieve because of the basic kind of information that was given to us about the reasons why they would not be able to retain any presence in Annan. So the second work stream is looking at attracting inward investment to the site. And it's no secret, and it's been in the press, that there is a number of interests already expressed from other companies, some in the same industry. But I am again concerned with the meeting I had with the Young's chief executive that he did state that he did not want to sell to a competitor. The third mainstream is support for the workforce. And again, like many of the politicians locally, we've had various meetings, public meetings, we've had surgeries, we've met with the trade unions, we're in the middle, or just at the beginning of a 45-day statutory consultation process. So, you know, a lot of us locally are actually getting members that work at Pinnies, families, etc., are very concerned about what could happen to them in the next 6 months and what could happen to their families. So those 3 work streams are being progressed with a certain vigour, but my motion mainly kind of focuses on the 4th work stream, which is basically mitigating the impact on the wider economy. So my motion hopes to address this by actually looking towards achieving the best outcome, the same as the other 3 work streams, but at the same time, we now have to actually prepare for the worst case scenario, which could befall Pinnies and the people that work there. We have to prepare a worst case scenario based on the fact that within 6 months, by the end of 2018, we could see 700 jobs wiped out from the local economy. And that's why I brought this motion here today, because I do believe that we have to move quickly to develop an action plan, similar to the Hoyek plan, within the Annan and surrounding DG area, to identify new economic projects and opportunities, or also develop suitable projects within the existing Annan master plan. These projects need to be fully costed and shovel-ready so that they can be quickly implemented from funding that we will need to be provided by both the Scottish and UK governments to prevent an economic disaster in Annan. I therefore am calling on the Chief Executive as an appointee to the South of Scotland Enterprise Partnership by the Scottish Government to ask for and secure at least £250,000 that will allow a team to be formed, preferably operating out of an Annan High Street premises, and there's a few available that we can actually look at as soon as possible so that we can develop projects, try and secure jobs and create new opportunities for Annan and the surrounding DG12 area. Annan is currently on an economic ticking time bomb, and we need to act quickly to prevent it turning into an economic wasteland. I'm sure all members will support this motion and so move.
Thank you, Councillor Marshall. Councillor McClelland.
Thank you, Leader, and thank you, Councillor Marshall, for proposing this motion. I have absolutely no qualms whatsoever about seconding the motion. I think you've gone through the detail, and in particular the 4 streams that are currently being worked on by the Ministerial Action Group. And it is that 4th stream where I do have significant concerns, and that's why I'm supporting the motion. SOCEP, that's the South of Scotland Economic Partnership, they're not due to kick in for a couple of years. So I think it's absolutely crucial that we bring that mechanism forward and get SOCEP's involvement as soon as possible. And I think the way you eloquently put there, projects fully costed and shovel-ready, that's what needs to happen here. Annan is facing a devastating situation. We've got the largest private employer in Dumfries and Galloway about to go to 0 personnel. So whatever we can do to support this, I would request full support. Up to now, we've had cross-party working. All the parties have been involved to try and do everything we can. And what we're asking here today by seconding this motion is to get that same commitment again. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor McClelland. Councillor Brodie.
Thanks, Leader. I'm pleased that this motion is before the Council. Many households in Annan, Eastriggs and the surrounding villages have been badly hit by this announcement, and we have to do a lot of work on the ground to prepare for the future. It's not just shovel-ready projects, it's also working with the businesses that are already there, the small businesses in the Annan area, to see how we can help them grow and take on some of the workforce that's there. And I'm glad that also Councillor Marshall has mentioned it's not just Annan, but the Annan area as well. So if the word area could be put on the end of that, that would be good. The last word is an action plan for Annan, just be the Annan area, just to reinforce that.
Councillor Crothers.
Thank you, Leader. Thanks very much to Councillor McClelland and Marshall for bringing this forward. I think it's worked very well up to now. The demise of pennies, or what looks like to be the demise of pennies in Annan, is important very much to, I think, DG12. It's summed up within the report, DG12, and I think that's probably as an amendment Annan area, but DG12 sums up very well. That's where the biggest impact will be. And as far as the report, what's trying to be achieved here, I just wondered, certainly supportive of anything we can get towards Annan, and very, very thankful to my fellow members, ward members, for bringing it up, taking this opportunity at full council. Is there anything else we can add to this and get gain from? So is 250,000 enough? If we're using the Hoyek as an example, are those figures based on something? We should be asking for more. Is a question. And is this an opportunity now? It's here in front of full council to actually ask both Scottish governments and Westminster, UK government, to try and get more from them as well. Maybe it's a unique position that our chief executive sits on the South of Scotland Enterprise Agency. Maybe that's the fact. And this is the driver behind this, but I just wonder, is there opportunities, and how do we actually monitor this as we go on?
So I think in Hoyek, once the action group was set up, it attracted significantly more funding from the Scottish Government, and that would obviously be one of the aims, I think, in getting an action group set up here in Annan, that we'd be able to bring in further funding from the Government. Councillor McGregor.
Thank you, Lydia. Yeah, just to echo Councillor Crothers' points, I think the reality is that the 430 job losses in Annan would relate to about the equivalent of 25,000 job losses in the Edinburgh area, and I think that gives the significance of the job losses, that although on the grand scheme it might not seem like a massive figure, for the locality and for that particular area who's already lost a lot of jobs, it is incredibly significant. I think what we should do early doors, if we're spending £250,000 to work up an action plan, we really do need to start lobbying both Scottish and UK governments to ensure that whatever comes as a result of that action plan can then be implemented. And I think we're talking millions. And I think, I would remit to the Leader and the Chief Executive to write to those sooner rather than later and pave the way and be on the front foot. But as I say, if this was the Edinburgh area, it would be 25,000 jobs as the job equivalent loss. And I think that that's massively significant. Thank you.
The first thing I'd like to say, I'd like to thank members for the support, both within the chamber and in the community. It's been a challenging, but actually very rewarding time to see the community coming together across party. I'd also like to thank Dave Gardner for his endless hours at home, at night, on the phone, whenever I've needed him. He's been there and working with the ward officer as well as part of the action group. I think if you look toward the reason that this hasn't come out of the ether, there's been a lot of work behind the scenes to almost line up the various elements to bring this forward. One of the learning points from the Hoyt was they got an announcement of money before they'd created a plan. That meant that there weren't projects ready to go, so there then became a lull with the community. Is anything ever going to happen? The projects came forward, were chasing the money rather than actually really good founded projects that came through. They also, if you looked at Annan in particular, I think we've had promises of action plans before, but it's never been backed by money. By having an announcement through the partnership, the interim partnership, it allows us to develop an action plan that ultimately be owned by the new enterprise agency. An enterprise agency, we're all determined to get a budget of at least 40 million, and it'll be one of the first areas in the south of Scotland to have a fully costed, fully supported, fully developed action plan ready to fund. So I think positioning it well, that does not stop announcements of support to the action plan once it's complete by both the Scottish and Westminster governments. And certainly we're working on that. And what we want to do is get the galvanisation of the local community. The other thing is there are real economic opportunities in Annan now that if we put a Tiger team together, could work in bringing those forwards at pace. Local members will know there's opportunities of business looking to expand in the area. So we could demonstrate a quick success. The other is we're bringing the Annan Master Plan and a capital plan to fruition in the next few weeks. So we have some enablers there. 250,000 we've asked for because we believe that a team of 4 covering an enterprise economic expert, a local worker, a planner and a business advisor is the right mix. Keep it small enough to build up that local confidence and competence over a long period of time with the community. And I think one of the leader's main comments was, we're in this for a long haul. Too often communities have seen as soon as we disappear off the front pages, we disappear. This would give the continuity of the funding. The other element is that the Cabinet Secretary has said that there's 10 million available to the partnership, 7 million capital and 3 million revenue, and if success is proved, more money would be available in the next budget. So if we have an action plan done at pace with the team, showing real movement of local opportunities quickly, then it almost becomes a no-brainer that the first element of funding to the south of Scotland in the next announcement of major capital investment would be into the Annan Action Plan area. So we're working hard to get the mood music right. Obviously, there's the Ministers' meeting on Wednesday, so members' support of this motion would be very, very useful to see if we can perhaps get another announcement of success perhaps on Wednesday, which would be good for the local community and local members. So I welcome your support. It's been an awful lot of work, but actually, we talk about 450. At its peak, that plant has got 1,000 people working in it. That spend in the local high street is critical. So it's not just the 450. And I think the other issue is local members will know there are whole families working here. They've never done anything else but go into that factory. They're not prepared for the short, sharp shock that this would bring. So if we can engage with them now and perhaps those opportunities and support, getting them perhaps to new opportunities. So I think that's part of the action plan process. So I think it's enough. I think it's a sufficient amount to get a proper action plan together at pace, demonstrate improvement and make a bid before the end of this financial year for significant capital funding to underpin it.
Councillor Hagman.
Thank you, Leader. I've no doubt that there's nobody in the room here that isn't going to support some form of action on this, and it's right that we do support this. I just have a question in terms of how this is actually put in place. So we're looking to seek 250,000 from the SOSEP. Who would receive that? Is it coming to the council or is it coming to the Regeneration Steering Group? And do we have the process in place to actually ensure that the funding is put through? Gavin has talked about we're asking and we have an action. Is this we as a council or is this as the steering group? I just want to ensure that if we're successful or if the bid to resource a dedicated team is successful, who is that dedicated team? Is it the council? Do we as a council then take responsibility for that £250,000, or is it go to a separate organisation, i.e. the steering group, and who ultimately is responsible within that steering group? It's just to get some clarity over the governance of it.
Jan. It would essentially be the council, but we would be reporting back not just to the funder, but to yourselves as well.
one of the things that, this is a very complex governance process, so one of the reasons that's why, because I'm on the partnership, so they can instruct me to do it because I'm the partnership. And the partnership then agrees and makes recommendations forward to the Cabinet Secretary for release of funding because it's the funding relates there. The logical place to bank it would be here, but one of the strengths of this bid, why I welcomed Councillor Marshall's motion, was that ideally the partnership shouldn't be funding things that the council can do itself. So therefore it's looking for bids from communities and private businesses, etc., for support. The Annan Regeneration Group is a member group, but it's got businesses, it's got other stakeholders on it. So it's a mechanism that's come from the community to the council. What I would look to do is in taking forward the funding, the final bid into the Cabinet Secretary would be to show the underpinning governance that we put in place. But my view is the best place is for us to bank it, but it to be governed locally so that those opportunities are there. And we bring back models for members to consider at that point. But we would be the banker. We wouldn't want a local community group to set up the hideous public accounting arrangements. It was an opportunity, that's why we've moved at pace, but we would bring back some thoughts for members to the next available committee on how we might govern it once we've got through the first stage of the partnership wanting a business case to be developed, which would be the next stage, and we do that at pace as well. It'll give us time to go to the next committee with how we'd want to govern it, underpin it, when we know we're going to get the money. It was also, we wouldn't wait, we'd look to be getting started and how we put a team of four together on the assumption that we are going to get funded, so that we'd be able to hit the ground running as soon as we got approval of money. So it's a sort of complex, but the council with the banker would look towards a governance supporting local steering of the money with local businesses involved. And certainly would want to do that at the next available committee once we got the nod that the partnership are supporting it and that the Cabinet Secretary is willing to release funds.
Councillor Ferguson and then Councillor Marshall.
Thanks, Leader. I totally agree. Quite rightly, the focus is on the epicentre of this disaster, and that has to be the first part. But I think it'd be interesting to see, as this goes forward and Gavin's reporting back to us, what the effects of the resultant tsunami are going to be, because there are significant numbers of people who actually travel to Annan from quite considerable distances, and it's a bit further than Eastriggs, and Brightkirk. There's many busloads go down from my ward, for example. So it'd be really interesting to see just exactly how that's going to take that forward.
Okay, David?
Yeah. So yeah, we're working with Scottish Enterprise for opportunities in the area. So they have a number of larger companies in the area for looking at employment opportunities. And actually, I was accompanying Catherine Field, who are just about to do a £10 million investment. So they're looking to take on some people. And I guess there will be some opportunities there for people who work in Pennies, but perhaps live in Dumfries for employment there. We're also working with Brown's Food Group in Sanker, who will be taking on 100 plus people, probably towards the latter part of summer. So again, we'll look at other opportunities with companies there to hopefully mitigate the job losses there as best we can.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. That's the positive stuff. I'm more interested at this moment in time of what the potential negatives might be. Is how do we deal with that part of the problem?
The Scottish Enterprise have been commissioned to bring back an economic impact assessment. So as soon as we receive that assessment, we'll share it with elected members, which it looks at the wider area. But we've done some initial modelling just on Annan, but they're doing it on the wider full impact through the supply chains, etc. So that as soon as we've got that available, we'll share that with all members for interest, because it could become a model when we have these events, unfortunately, elsewhere in the region.
Councillor Marshall, followed by Councillor Charteris.
Well, I can just kind of sum up with motion as well, maybe just to take on some of the points. But my intention was to try and secure the 250,000 and then look at the governance behind that. I think, as you've touched on, there is an economic impact assessment. So we know that, around about 65% of the workforce live in the Annan area. So we know that's going to be affected, but we will get a better chance to look and scrutinise the whole kind of impact and where that is. And hopefully we'll have a fluid model that can actually be dynamic and actually change towards, the picture that starts to come about. In my motion, and it's covered in the report, it was for Annan and surrounding DG12 area. So if that's not clear in the motion, then we can have that as an amendment. I think this is an opportunity, though, that the council have got a number of regeneration vehicles across the region. And this is a chance to look at the Annan model afresh, maybe look at the role and remit of the Annan Regeneration Steering Group and the projects that we currently have, but to build on that and look to have something that can respond quickly. And also, the main thing is to lever in the additional kind of funding that will be required for the projects that we identify. So I'm really instructing the Chief Executive to go away, get that 250,000, and then we can actually look how that's applied.
Thanks, Councillor Marshall. Councillor Charters.
Thank you, Leader. The Chief Executive and I had breakfast the other day together while we listened to these enterprise lectures. And it seems to me that with your appointment to SOCEP, that's one thing. We have an insider in the business there. I have every confidence that the Chief Executive will press very hard to get this £250,000 per annum, which they thoroughly deserve. But I was wondering whether we should also be thinking in the longer term, once Scottish Enterprise have settled down in the middle of Scotland, perhaps we should be thinking now about what sort of larger amounts, which they will be handling, could be perhaps be sourced with us down here. And also, I remember well the chap telling us that they were very short of ideas for borderlands, and we all had to come up with ideas that they might they might fit in with their distribution of money. Well, this one seems to be suddenly come forward, and we should be saying to borderlands, we have a really good reason for getting your money as soon as possible. And that may be, at the moment, I think, it's about 500 yards of road going into Carlisle Airport, and they weren't terribly impressed with that, but this one they might well be impressed with. So could I ask the Chief Executive perhaps to see accelerated distribution of money from those two other organisations?
Borderlands, as members are aware, is a complex project, but we've already been having discussions with senior civil servants about the potential for, if an action plan is complete, could this be an early Borderlands announcement? We have to be very mindful that the Borderlands is a partnership of 5 councils, so it needs to be a model in which there is a rationale that fits the Borderlands rationale. And we know we have it, but I think that what we'd want to avoid is the announcement of money with no projects and no plan. And I think that the alignment of saying that the Borderlands and particularly the Westminster money may well welcome an action plan and look to fund it as part of Borderlands is what we'd look for at this point. So we can put together projects that are able to tick, because that would have to go through a treasury process for release of money. And that's got different criteria to the Scottish Government. So we'd hate to talk about Borderlands and then fail, but I think that we can construct an action plan that will tick all the boxes for the Treasury and around productivity and inclusive growth that would allow money to be released. So I would welcome that perhaps this, once the action plan is completed at pace, it could be welcomed as part of consideration by Treasury and Borderlands, and I think that would put us in a nice place with our partners just now. But as I say, I would hate to I don't think the Treasury would release money unless we detailed business cases and projects. The action plan we're referring to effectively would be the construction of a big DG12 business case for investment.
Add to that what the Chief Executive said, of course, our MP, or my MP, is also at the moment on the Treasury Select Committee. He would be in an ideal position to promote the requirement of Annan to get money from Borderlands. So there may be some other opportunities, because we've got to think there's an immediate problem, but also this is going to take some time to solve, and we may well need more money in the future to bring Annan back off its knees.
Okay. Right, Councillor Hislop.
It's possibly a couple of daft laddie questions, but just for clarification. Gavin keeps talking about at pace. Is that pace the group that goes in and helps, or is that at speed? And the other one was just clarify that it's going to be the council that holds the money, but the steering group that actually has the four folk working for them.
I think the arrangements around that is something that we'd have to develop over the next few weeks. But I would hate for the length of time it normally takes the public sector to sort out governance mean that we lose the money. I'd rather we had the money and then I satisfied whichever rules then have come with it. But I think what we need is actually to be a partnership of local members and business, because that's the Hoyk model that the government were very willing to fund. The more local, you can have local businesses and local members providing steering. How that then feeds into the council and the government, I could discuss with members and take through. But if we don't move quickly, not at pace, if we don't move quickly, we could lose the money as we do the public sector thing of talking about governance all the time. And I think that we have really good models we could build on that fit what they've already acknowledged as being a model in Hoyk. I just need to debate that wider with wider members before I would put it before I finalise it.
Thank Councillor Carruthers.
Just very briefly, I mean, Councillor Marshall said it would expand slightly. I think that's what it needs. I think his motion's absolutely bang on, apart from the wider DG12 and the wider community. But in regards to, I wonder if it could have, doesn't it have to be explicit within the recommendations? Recent action, chair of the Economy and Environment Infrastructure Committee is here. Just the next meeting that we get an update in regards to this, because there's a lot of questions being asked around about governance, such like that may well be able to get an update in regards to that report going to the next CI committee if that's possible.
Seem to be expected. I think that progress reports on the situation in Annan should be going to the next DEI committee. I don't think I'm speaking out of turn, the chairman there. Councillor Marshall.
Yeah, just to clarify, totally accept what Councillor Carruthers is saying. Basically, the letter that I sent and the motion was included DG12. So.
Okay. It's any further comments? Nothing further from the seconder or proposer. Okay, we're happy to agree the motion and to take it forward. Thanks very much for your attendance.